Budget started. Called it to order. First item on the agenda, we have a letter. Mr. Anderson, you want to talk about this letter? The district judge travel expense.
Yes, sir. This is item B1 in your packet. This is a letter from the Auditor of State. This is to request additional appropriation in the General Appropriation Bill. Mr. Chairman, a reminder about the General Appropriation Bill. That is the bill by Constitution we have to pass before we pass anything else in the fiscal session and regular sessions. This letter asks to amend that to increase the appropriation in the travel expense line item for the district judges from $65,000 to $80,000, and to add some special language to make it clear that they require receipts be submitted within 60 days after the expense so they can pay those. This is, and we do have a representative from the Auditor of State here, Mr. Chairman.
If you'll identify yourself and explain what we're doing here.
Jason Brady, Deputy Auditor, Auditor of State's Office. So as many of you may or may not know, the Auditor's Office administers, and I use that word in quotation, administers the District Judge Travel Expense Reimbursement Fund. So basically, as judges, district judges have to travel within their jurisdictional area and hear cases, we get the expenses and so on. As it was said, right now the appropriation level is $65,000. Last fiscal year they were at $68,000. Thinking of inflation and everything else, we are requesting on their behalf a bump up in the budget to $80,000. And also, one of the other things you'll notice is that we are asking that they have to turn in receipts within 60 days of an expenditure. If you may or may not know this, OPM requires state employees to turn it in 45 days. So again, this would help us have partly a better gauge of where the expenses go throughout the fiscal year, and that's why we're asking this request, and we've heard no opposition to that request. Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from any members? Thank you. We need a motion to adopt the letter from the auditor. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Letter is adopted. Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, DHS is up next, and they have a PowerPoint to present.
Ms. Good morning, ladies. If y'all will all identify yourselves, and then whoever's going to present it may start.
Good morning, Christy Putnam, Secretary, Department of Human Services.
Good morning, Janet Mann, Deputy Secretary for Programs and State Medicaid Director.
Good morning, Misty Eubanks, Deputy Secretary for Operations and Budget and also Interim CFO.
And Renee Eichert, Deputy CFO and Interim Budget Director.
You're free to present your PowerPoint.
Thank you, Chair. We wanted to go through just a general overview of the 2024 pre-fiscal budget information from Department of Human Services.
Let me just stop you. Members, also, you have a paper copy of it on the bottom of your agenda. So if you want to follow along that or on the screen. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. Thank you. Just wanted to go over a reminder of the general overview of Department of Human Services divisions. We are the largest agency. I know you all need no reminders about that. We have our Division of Aging, Adult, and Behavioral Health Services, under which we have both aging and adult services and substance abuse and mental health services, those two emphasis areas broken out at this point. We have DCFS, Division of Children and Family Services, DCO, Division of County Operations, DDS, Division of Developmental Disability Services, DMS, Division of Medical Services, DIPSQA, DPSQA, Division of Provider Services and Quality Assurance, and DYS, Division of Youth Services. We also have DHS Shared Services. As you will remember, DHS underwent some of the transformation where we consolidated shared services into one area to serve all divisions. And just a reminder that Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education moved to Arkansas Department of Education under the LEARNS Act, so they have transferred out. Just an overview of the DHS budget. We do have a total funded budget of just over $11 billion annually. Of that, just over $8 billion is federal funds, or 73%. State general revenue is approximately $1.8 billion, or 17%, and other revenue is $1.1 billion, 10%. This is a breakdown of what our state general revenue allocation goes to. Again, the total SGR allocation of $1.8 billion, just over $1.8 billion, is divided up between our divisions as you see on the slide. I won't read it out to you, but happy to come back to that for any questions. And you can see that the largest portion of the budget does go to the Division of Medical Services, where our Medicaid budget lives. So in the DHS budget this year, you have only seen 2 requested changes from the last biennial budget. Those 2 changes are a direct result of legislative action that happened during the 2023 regular session, and that was the 2 requests are $600,000 in state general revenue to support the federally required state match for our placement and residential licensing unit, which was retained by DHS under the LEARNS Act. Everything else transferred over to the Arkansas Department of Education. The second request is a $3.5 million in state general revenue that shifted from Commerce, DWS, to DHS to support the state match for the TANF program, which is now with DHS. So those are the only 2 changes that you will see in this budget request. Just an overview of DHS personnel to give you an idea of the number of positions we currently have versus our authorized and budgeted positions. We currently have 6,518 filled positions. And the distribution, you can see the largest distribution is between Developmental Disability Services, Division of County Operations, and Division of Children and Family Services, with the remaining approximately quarter of positions spread out through the remaining divisions. And that concludes the introduction overview for Department of Human Services.
Members, we have some questions. Senator Chesterfield, you're recognized for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Madam Secretary and others who are here. Thank you for your work. I am concerned, as always, about the turnover rate at DHS, because in the past it has been rather large. Let's put it this way. What are we looking at in the way of maintaining our workers?
So we actually, I won't say all divisions, but in some divisions, and in particular DCFS, over the past year, we have seen an actual decline in turnover. We have worked on some policies to retain staff, including the Families at Work policy, where we have individuals who are able to bring their infant to work for the first 6 months, or in some circumstances bring their children to work when there's a school closure. We've also implemented remote work policies and alternate scheduling, which is a 4 10-hour workday schedule. So we have seen some gradual improvement in our retention rates, and our turnover has declined slightly.
Would you tell me then, because at one point it got to be 56% turnover, then it was 40%. What is the percentage now in DHS?
We can get that specific number for you.
I would
and I think I
appreciate
have it in my binder, but it'll take me a minute to find
All right,
it.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Because that is a continued area of concern for me because of the largeness of the agency and the importance of the agency. Because if we cannot get those individuals working there in a larger capacity than that, we're going to have to cut back on the services that you provide. You also know that my concern is about the TANF monies. What have we done to mitigate that situation so that we are able now to be more proactive as far as TANF is concerned, or that's how I would put it anyway.
So with the TANF money, and I'm sure we'll get into more detail about that through the budget discussions, but with the TANF funding, we got to a point where we understood exactly where we are with the current year grants. We're in the process of beginning notification of where those grants stand for the next fiscal year, and then we will be working with stakeholders and with our team and with the legislature and the governor's office to make sure that we are strategically investing TANF in the areas that support the 4 pillars.
Okay. And last but certainly not least, how are we at the Arkansas Juvenile Assessment Treatment Centers and other centers that deal with our juvenile group of children who are incarcerated?
I'm sorry, what's the specific question around
The
DYS?
specific question is, what are the numbers now? Are we having more students or more children there than we really should have, or have the numbers gone down? That's specifically the question.
Yes, ma'am. We have had an increase in commitments, as you're aware, over the past year. We have been working with the juvenile judges very closely to implement some changes in our discharge and release policy. We have just implemented that with the judges as of last week. I think we had our last discussion with them last week, and we are looking to see what that does to impact our numbers. But we are looking at first-time commitments having a lesser time commitment, but we also have reopened another facility to try to distribute younger populations in a different location, and we do expect to be able to report back on what changes have brought.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for always taking my call.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Lundstrom, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you. I'm over here, sorry. Out of the total number of authorized is 8,231 and filled is 6,018, so you have 1,713 positions open, correct?
Yes, and that is a combination of budgeted and unbudgeted.
Budgeted and unbudgeted. Would it be possible if you just, since those are so difficult to fill, take some of that money or half of that money and use that to give DHS employees an increase in their wages so that we would have less turnover? Is there flexibility in the budget to do that? If we're not filling all the positions, let's at least take care of the ones that are there and slow down the turnover.
So I will look to Misty. Yeah. The first part of that question I'll answer with, we are working at a state level on some of the things that you saw announced yesterday with the governor's announcement on things that she's working with the legislature to implement some increases in compensation and really to address the pay plan and classification system. The other part of the question is, we are working on some separate items that are outside of making any changes to the pay plan and classification. We are working on a pay plan improvement for our nursing staff, our direct care nursing staff. So we are taking, within our current budgeted dollars, we are taking action on specific areas where we have the highest rate of turnover or the highest need.
Okay, thank you. One follow-up question. How far is the docket backed up with judges and courts with DHS working with families?
Oh, I'm afraid I'm not able to answer that, but we can get you some information on general.
I would be curious how far that docket is backed up, not due to y'all, but due to judges not working past 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and dockets being backed up. We're getting complaints in Northwest Arkansas about that.
Okay, we will follow up on that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Wooten, you're recognized for a
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Chairman. On your page 6, you have 8,231 positions authorized. You're showing that you have 6,518 filled. Of those that are budgeted, how many of those are over 2 years vacant, have been vacant for 2 years or more?
Okay.
I certainly can't get you the exact number on that, but we've been working diligently with OPM to be responsive to the act that was previously passed, and we've been turning in positions regularly that are past the 2-year fill mark.
Okay. Could you give me the dollar amount that are vacant over 2 years that are budgeted?
Yes, I will get you that information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Springer, you're recognized.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for being here today. As you know, I serve on the Age and Youth and Children and Family Services Committee. And during those meetings, I've talked about turnover rates in the plan, and I'm happy to hear that you've indicated that those things are looking better. Is that plan in writing? Because I've previously asked whether or not, and I was assured that there was something going to be developed to address those things that you've talked about. And I like what I've heard so far. So I'm just wondering, is that something that's guiding? You have something in writing that's guiding you all to address the concerns that were brought up by Senator Chesterfield?
We do have the policies put in writing about the remote work, the policies I referenced. We do have them in writing, and we're glad to share those with you.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the employees understand that, because that's where it lies, that they understand that they can do those sort of things to make them feel better about their jobs. So the question is whether or not they understand what's available to them in order to make their workplace better, because the turnover rate has to start with the employee to make them understand what it is that's taking place and what's expected of them. So I guess I'm just saying communication to them as to what you all have in place so that they can understand it would probably make them feel better about the workplace that they're in at this point.
Yes, we have communicated that out to all staff. We've done several different online meetings about it, and supervisors have the information as well. I won't pretend that we're not so large that we can't improve our communications, but we have made a significant attempt through our Human Resources Office, as well as our county administrators and our division directors have made a concerted effort to make sure that employees understand what the new policies are and how that they can take them up on it.
Oh, I would. So I guess go ahead and send that to me so I can see what you have. Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Jay Richardson, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 3, it looks like, two questions actually. So it looks like we take a significant amount of federal funds, right, 73%. Is that average amongst other states? That percentage, do you know?
I mean, I would hesitate to say it's average among states. There are a number of states that do have a significant amount of federal funding, depending on what their state demographics look like and what their profiles look like as far as taking in different federal programs. Medicaid is different in every state, so the Medicaid budget fluctuates greatly. But that is not. I won't say it's atypical for that amount of funding to be a state budget for human services.
Okay, and my second question is could you kind of give me an idea of what is the other revenue, that 10% that's there? Can you kind of give me an idea of what that is?
Grants. I'm going to ask deputy secretaries to respond to that. It is grants, but there are other specific funding areas that they know better than I do.
That's correct. So we receive various other funds. Some of those in the Medicaid space, for instance, are provider fees. We have provider fees in other spaces due to licensure and certification. We have special language that allows timber fees, for instance, in our DDS space. So depending on the individual division budget and special language, other fees can be from a myriad of sources. We also receive other funds from participation in like federal demonstration activities. So we've done that in our DCFS space. So our federal partners have put out incentive programs or demonstrations, and when we participate in that and we show good results, we sometimes receive incentive payments. So that can also be considered other funding, even though it's from a federal source.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Jack Ladyman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm over here. I'm curious, on page 4, the pie chart there, it shows that the Division of Medical Services looks like takes about 75% of those funds. And then if you look at page 6, DMS only utilizes 1% of the labor force. Why is that such a difference?
Good morning, sir. Yes, That is true. DMS takes the bulk of the general revenue to match with the federal funds to pay out to all the providers. So that is where we run the MMIS program to pay the claims that are filed every week for Medicaid, and that is done through a contractor and employees.
So most of that is external spending.
It's external spending to claim services throughout the state. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
All right, members, seeing no other questions, y'all are excused. Appreciate y'all coming forward. We'll have Ms. Walls come up.
They can stay down, she'll do a presentation.
We need to make room for at least one. So
She's just gonna walk them through the. She'll tell us. I'm not sure. I think we'll start on 53.
Ms. Walls, if you'll identify yourself and then tell us where we're going to be in this big binder.
Certainly, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Lila Walls. I'm the Bureau of Legislative Research. Yes, ma'am. Is that better?
Hold
Senator
on.
Chesterfield?
I did one thing. I'm going to stop you.
Yes, sir.
I forgot. Senator Chesterfield's about to get me. Senator Chesterfield, you're recognized for personal point of privilege.
Thank you so much for my point of personal privilege. Ladies and gentlemen, let us wish a happy birthday to Senator-elect Jamie Scott. As I embarrass her.
Representative Scott, do you want us to sing or are you okay?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Reverend Scott. Happy birthday to you.
All right, Ms. Walls, we'll get back to business now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Lila Walls. I'm with the Bureau of Legislative Research. Okay, we're going to start on page 53, but I do have something that I'd like to reiterate that the department talked about. As a result of Act 237, which is the LEARNS Act, there are changes to multiple divisions in DHS, along with the elimination of the Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education. This division was transferred to the Department of Education and has become the Office of Early Childhood. For historical completeness, the appropriations that were included in the fiscal year 24 Appropriation Act for the Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education are included in your manual on pages 437 through 455. I'm not going to talk about them, but they are there if you would like to see them. There are corresponding appropriations that will appear in a new bill for the Department of Education during the fiscal session. Changes due to program transfers will be noted as we encounter them. Now, on page 53 are the four appropriations for the shared services. If you'll move to the farthest right column to the executive recommendation, you'll see that their total fiscal year 25 request is for $54.3 million, and this includes 3 new appropriations and 222 new positions that are being requested as a result of program transfers and acts passed during the regular session. If you'll turn the page to pages 54 and 55, this is for the new Placement and Residential Licensing Unit, which is tasked with enforcing the Child Welfare Licensing Act, and its duties include inspecting and monitoring residential facilities and placement agencies that house or place foster children, and it works closely with the Division of Children and Family Services. It's funded with federal funds and various program support in the form of interagency transfers. This unit was a former part of the Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education. It was carved out in Section 71 1 of Act 237 to remain within the Department of Human Services. And the executive recommendation is for $1.18 million in total appropriation and 17 positions, and this includes approximately $1 million in salary and matching and $180,000 combined in operating expenses and conference fees and travel. Now, if you'll turn the page with me to the next page, this is the TANF block grant paying appropriation. This appropriation was transferred from the Department of Commerce, Division of Workforce Services as a result of Act 832. This appropriation and its positions administer the Transitional Employment Assistance and Work Pays programs and are funded with general and federal revenues. The executive recommendation for this is for 205 positions and a single line item appropriation of approximately $52.7 million. And if you'll turn one more page with me to pages 58 and 59, this is the Individual Account Program appropriation. It's part of the TANF program and was also transferred from the Department of Commerce Division of Workforce Services. It was created to assist low-income families in building good savings habits. Savings can only be withdrawn when the goal has been met or for qualified emergency withdrawals, and services are provided by contracting with a qualified nonprofit fiduciary organization. And it's federally funded with TANF block grant funds. The executive recommendation is for approximately $142,000 in professional fees, and this concludes my presentations for this section.
Representative Kavanaugh, do you have a question for Ms. Walls?
No, it's for the agency.
Okay, all right. Any questions from Ms. Staff? Go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming. My first question, and it's information you'll need to gather for me if you don't mind. On page number 59 is the individual development account. Can someone get me the info about how many accounts we have and the dollar amount that we're holding in trust and where that interest is going?
Yes, I'd be happy to get that information for you.
Okay. And then follow up, Mr. Chair, on 65, if you could also get me the information, because we have a large over appropriation. This is the various building constructions. It's a human services renovation account. If you can let me know what the master plan is for this money to be spent, how that's supposed to be spent. And
Now, we haven't got to 65 yet.
oh, we haven't?
You're getting ahead of us.
Oh, sorry. Y'all have them. Thank you.
Any other questions up to page 59? Who's in 34? Representative Lundstrom.
Just a quick question. It talks about on page 58 that for each contribution to the program participants to their IDA savings account, the state matches the deposits by $3. Can you explain that program to me? I'm wanting to sign up.
This was a program under the TANF umbrella. Unfortunately, the federal government discontinued this program in 2017. However, this program was continued with TANF and DWS prior to it coming to DHS. We have a contract with a bank lending organization who maintains these accounts, and that contract expires on June 30 of 2024. And so as a result, we'll be sunsetting this program. And when the federal government discontinued the specific funding, this has continued to be matched through TANF block grant funds.
Okay. How many people participate in that program?
I can get you that number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just do these and then do
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Seat 21, that's Representative Wooten. You're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 55, shows 17 positions. And it's $705,000. That's $41,447, somewhere in that range. And that well below the average medium pay? And that $8,000 to $10,000 less than the average for all of state government? What do those positions do?
Are you asking about the salary for those positions? The 17 positions and what the average salary is and what they're responsible for? Correct? So the salary for those positions, we can get you the range of what those positions are and what their salary is, but those are the positions that are responsible for the residential licensing. They do the surveys, they do the actual licensing of placements for our children, for child care and for foster care, residential and foster care.
Okay, on page 5 of your handout, 600,000 is general revenues. That's a match for the state, for the federal government. Where do you, how do you receive the federal money? Is it all at one time, or is it spread out through the year? Or, in other words, what I'm really after is what are you doing with that money when you get it in? You don't spend it all at one time, do you?
No, sir, and we also don't receive state general revenue allocation all at one time from Department of Finance and Administration either. We get those, all agencies receive those to their paying accounts as distributions or allocations spread throughout the year based on revenue collection. And then when we run payroll, we pull the federal match for that expenditure, and then we put it with the state match for us to pay payroll and do other activities.
When do you receive the federal money? I know it's spread out through the year, or is it all at one time?
Yes, sir. We have to pay the expenditure first, and then we are able to make the federal draw based on expenditures. So, for instance, payroll, when we run payroll every 2 weeks for the state, that's when we would make that federal draw.
So are they paying you in the arrears then?
Yes,
Is that what?
that's correct.
Okay.
It's reimbursement based.
So that money is already paid out, and you're returning it back to the state treasurer?
Yes, sir. That's
You
correct.
paid it. Okay. One more follow-up. What percentage are you using for the personnel match? Is it 25, 35% of the salary?
So it's a state 50-50 match, but when calculating our state fringe, we roughly calculate around 32% per employee.
What percent do you use for a salary? Let's say they make 41,000. So what are you matching that with? The amount, the dollar amount per individual employee.
Right. So around half of that would require state general revenue, and the other 50% would be a federal dollar.
So you use a 50% match number?
For this work unit, yes, that's correct. That's what's federally allowable with this federal program is a 50-50 state match. So about 50% of the funds are federal and about 50% are state general revenue.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Senator Love, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Putnam, I know that, we've been discussing the DCFS division and some of the turnover concerns or challenges that we've been having. In your upcoming budget, did you look at those employee, speaking of personnel, did you look at those employee, the pay scale for those employees and look at actually trying to bring them up in order to kind of stop some of the turnover the consistent turnover we're having, or how are we addressing that in this year's budget?
So I think part of that is the statewide approach that the governor's letter to employees announced yesterday. We're looking across the state at how do we elevate a number of different compensation ranges. So that is part of it, which will help all of our state employees, including those in DCFS. So we're grateful for the partnership between the governor's office and the legislature in looking to address that. The other items that we have been trying to address, we did implement supervisors' ability to receive overtime when they're carrying a caseload in DCFS.
Okay.
And so we are continuing to try to take measures in many different ways to address compensation challenges specifically to DCFS, but across the agency.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, members, seeing no more questions on these last four, we need a motion for executive rec. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Ms. Walls?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next one that we're going to discuss is the Secretary's Office and that Department Appropriation summaries on page 63. The Secretary's Office houses the core business functions for the department, and in fiscal year 24, it has total authorized appropriations of approximately $85 million, with 662 positions utilized across the department and 4 appropriations. The executive recommendation is for a total of approximately $84.7 million and 652 authorized positions in fiscal year 25, with changes up to 1 appropriation from program transfers. If you'll turn with me to page 69, this is the appropriation summary for the operations appropriation for the Secretary's Office. It's funded with general federal revenues and other sources that are determined primarily by the department's cost allocation plan. Most of the positions in this appropriation do work for multiple departments, so they're paid back by those individual divisions for whom that person does the work. An executive recommendation is for a decrease in 10 positions, along with a decrease of approximately $350,000 in salary and matching for a total of $67.8 million. These changes are a result of the transfer of the Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education to the Department of Education due to Act 237, the LEARNS Act, and these positions in the appropriation that goes with them were associated with the core business functions of that particular division. And this concludes my presentation.
Representative Kavanaugh, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have my question on number 65 already, so I appreciate that. My other question is going to be on page 71, which is the DHS paying grants. Since 2019, it's looked like we haven't really used that appropriation. We haven't given anything out, but we've done transfers out of it. Where's those transfers to?
Thank you for your question. We transferred those out to other state agencies and departments, primarily workforce education, rehabilitation services, and spinal cord commission, for instance.
If you don't mind, if you'll get that information, give it to the staff so we can have that. I'd appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we need a motion for executive rec. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Ms. Walls?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next division that we're going to discuss is the Division of Aging, Adult, and Behavioral Health Services, and its Department Appropriation summaries on pages 73 and 74. This division provides support and protective services to physically disabled adults, older adults, and adults with behavioral health issues, and also coordinates the state's substance abuse treatment and prevention efforts. For fiscal year 24, the division has total authorized appropriations of approximately $275.6 million, with 1,154 positions and 10 appropriations. And the total executive recommendation is for $275.9 million in fiscal year 25, with changes to 1 appropriation. If you'll look on page 84, This is the operations appropriation for this division, which pays the salaries and operational expenses of the division, including the operations at the Arkansas State Hospital and Arkansas Health Center. It's funded with general revenue, federal revenue, and various program support. There's a roughly $8,000 increase in the operating expenses line item for increased costs for food service and pharmacy fees, and there is a $500,000 decrease in the professional fees line item. These changes result in an executive recommendation of $127.5 million in fiscal year 25. And this concludes my presentation for this division.
Any questions for staff? Is yours for the agency, Representative Kavanaugh? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page, we went through 76, page 76, it is the Community Alcohol Safety Program. This has a fund balance that we continue over, and I'm sure this is because it's coming to, the fund balance has to be used for very specific things. If someone, do we know off the top of our heads what that has to be used for?
Yes, Paula Stone, Arkansas Department of Human Services, Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health Director. Yes, Representative Kavanaugh, that has to be used for, so when somebody is arrested for driving while intoxicated, then it has to be used for both the screening of that person to see if they need further treatment, the educational classes that are required. We also purchase certificates and we provide that training, making sure that the people that are providing that educational classes are paid for that work.
Okay, so we just don't spend enough for the amount that we're collecting in this specific. Is that why we carry the continual fund balance?
So, you know, during the public health emergency, some of those classes and some of those arrests slowed down. They're picking back up, and so we're going to need to continue paying for those classes. So those providers. We also had some funding that we used to help them with some kinds of infrastructure builds as well.
Okay, and one more follow-up, Mr. Chair, thank you. This is going to be doing on page 87, which is going to be the grants paying account. And I want to talk about the senior citizen funding. And I think we've had this conversation multiple times. On the senior citizen funding, we have it appropriated at $10 million. And I noticed in 23, we did spend the $9.3 million. That was part of it. Was that COVID and ARPA funds?
Jay Hill with DHS with DABA, and I'm the aging director. Yes, Representative, that would include the supplemental funding.
Okay.
Our general revenue appropriation in that line is $5 million.
It's $5 million.
Yes,
and,
ma'am.
and it's been historically $5 million for some time, has it not? Okay, thank you.
Senator Flowers, you're recognized for a question.
Yes. On page 84, in brackets or parentheses, there are certain items that reflect, one, a transfer to Medicaid match, reallocation of resources, and then excess appropriation funding. Can you explain that? It's on page 84. Is that a decrease? What is that? It's under funding sources.
Those are funding sources, yes, that's correct. So for example, Medicaid match, we have facility settings under this division that are eligible to receive Medicaid funding. However, they do put up a portion of the state match to receive those funds back. This traces those funds.
So what's in these parentheses is going to an agency in each of these instances? One's for 128,000 reallocation of resources.
Correct. So we utilize reallocation of resources up to 4 times annually. Those come in front of peer and ALC for reviews and approvals, but those are typically transfers between various divisions under the DHS umbrella.
So does the parentheses, the number in parentheses mean a decrease? What is that?
Yes, yes. So those just indicate transfers.
And they appear somewhere else in the budget, in some other agency's budget?
Yes, ma'am, they probably are grouped with the medical services budget. We primarily transfer money for Medicaid payments that are associated with the health center and with ASH where appropriate if they're beneficiaries in those facilities.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator. Having no more questions, we need a motion of executive rec. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Stands approved. We're going now, Ms. Walls, to Children and Family Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next division we're going to talk about is the Division of Children and Family Services, and their appropriation summary is on page 105 of your manual. This division provides support services, foster care, adoption, and protective services for children and families across the state. For fiscal year 24, it has total authorized appropriations of $312.5 million with 1,422 positions and 6 appropriations. The total executive recommendation for this division is approximately $313.5 million in fiscal year 25 with no significant changes. So I'll discuss the operations appropriation very briefly. It is on page 111, and this is the summary for their operations appropriation, which provides for the administrative and salaried support of the operations of the division, and it's funded with general revenue, federal revenue, and various program support, and the executive recommendation is for $145.6 million in fiscal year 25, and that concludes my presentation for this division.
Representative Kavanaugh, if you got a question for this agency,
Yes, sir.
you're recognized.
Thank you. This is going to be question on 115, which is the Children's Trust Fund. And I realize this is special revenue, but we have a large fund balance in there. We don't seem to spend a lot out of that. Can you tell me what we're doing with that money?
Yes, so good morning. I'm Tiffany Wright. I'm the director for the Division of Children and Family Services. The Children's Trust Fund is focused on primary prevention. So we have a program called Baby and Me that's operated at the WIC office. That's a prevention program supporting moms with basic support around newborn babies. So that is one thing we have. We also have the support to the community schools as well as supporting, sorry, I lost my train of thought. The community schools, WIC Baby and Me, and Parenting for Prevention. All of that is some of the programs that are in the Children's Trust Fund.
We only spent $141,000 in this, and as it's probably been, and y'all are well aware of it, we have a problem with maternal and issues, and with the death rate that we have. What restrictions are on this special revenue where it can be spent? Do we know what the restrictions are on this fund balance?
I can get that information for you.
If you don't mind, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Representative Lundstrom, you're recognized for a question.
Can you tell us how many people participate in this program?
Not off the top of my head, but I will get that information.
Yeah, I'd like to know that. Thank you.
And it does, the Baby and Me serve specific counties, so I'll provide that in that answer.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we need a motion on the family services for executive rec. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Stands approved. We'll now go to the county operations. Ms. Walls.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next division is the Division of County Operations, and its appropriation summary is on page 121 in your manual. This division is primarily responsible for administering local office locations around the state, determining and redetermining eligibility across multiple need and asset-based programs, and enrolling eligible beneficiary applicants in those programs. For fiscal year 24, it has total authorized appropriations of $196 million with 1,834 positions and 9 appropriations. The total executive recommendation is for $197.5 million in fiscal year 25 with no significant changes, so we'll discuss the operations appropriation briefly. It is on page 134. This is the summary, and it provides for the administrative and primary salaried support of the division's operations. It's funded through general revenue, federal revenues, and various program support with a total executive recommendation of $167.5 million in fiscal year 25. And this concludes my presentation for this division.
Any questions for staff or the department? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion for executive rec. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Now we're going down to development disabilities. Ms. Walls.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next division is the Division of Developmental Disability Services, and its department appropriation summary is on page 144 of your manual. This division is responsible for the administration of programs and services for people who are developmentally disabled through community-based services and programs and at the 5 Human Development Centers. It has a total authorized appropriations for fiscal year 24 of $211.1 million with 2,535 positions and 8 appropriations. The executive recommendation is for a total of approximately $207.6 million in fiscal year 25 with changes in 1 appropriation for program transfers. If you will look on page 157, this is the summary for the operations appropriation for this division. It supports the operations of the division, including the management and operation of the 5 Human Development Centers, and is funded with general revenue, federal revenues, and various program support. The executive recommendation is for a net decrease of $3.5 million to $188.2 million in fiscal year 25 as a result of the First Connections Unit, which administers the state's early intervention program for children who are not yet school-aged, moving to the Department of Education in Act 237, the LEARNS Act. This decrease includes the following changes in positions and line items. There's a decrease of 32 regular positions and a combined decrease of $394,000 in salaries and matching. Decrease in 1 extra help position and $50,000 in appropriation there. A decrease of $510,000 in operating expenses, approximately $9,000 in conference fees and travel, and $100,000 in professional fees. There are also some grants lines that are paid through this appropriation that moved as well, and they have shifted $2.5 million in the grants and patient services line item and approximately $9,000 in the purchase of services line item. And again, that executive recommendation is for $188.2 million in fiscal year 25. And this concludes my presentation for this division.
Representative Duke, you have a question for staff or the agency?
For the agency, and I'm not sure, thank you, Mr. Chair, if it's appropriate yet. It's for page 121. So if I need to wait.
Well, go ahead and ask it. We've already passed that. Go ahead and
I'm
ask
sorry, thank you. There is a refugee resettlement program listed on there. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, we'll have Director Mary Franklin come up to give an answer on the refugee resettlement.
Thank you.
We still got to do a motion on this one, right? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mary Franklin, Director of the Division of County Operations. The Refugee Resettlement Program, it is a federal program and it is funded through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Individuals who are resettled through this program go through rigorous State Department Homeland Security protocols before they are allowed to enter the country. And they are able to receive cash assistance, a small amount, $81 a month for one person for up to 12 months from the day they enter the country. And they also receive supportive services and Medicaid. Be happy to take any other questions.
Representative Duke, you have a follow-up, or you good? Okay. Representative Enid, who's your question for? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the City Homeless Assistance Grant. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, I want to confirm. I believe that is our appropriation for the Emergency Solutions Grant that the department administers. And that grant, the purpose of that grant is to help address homelessness, reduce homelessness through funding for shelters, for street outreach, and also some rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention.
Thank you.
Representative Lademan, who's your question for?
The agency.
Well, we got two of them down there. I need to know which one.
Well, let me ask my question.
We had to
Maybe
back
they'll-
up, you know.
Maybe they'll jump in here. I had a question about DDS on page 156.
Okay. Ms. Franklin, I think you're off the hook for right now. But
I'm over here.
Stand on alert, come back.
I was looking at the, on 156, the budget there. Overtime, looks like the budget, the previous budget was 2 million, and we're increasing that to 4.3 million. Is that because we can't fill positions? I mean, why is that the overtime doubling?
Tommy Tarpley, Interim Director, Division of Developmental Disability Services. So Representative Lademan, the 4.3 million is our appropriation amount. The budgeted amount that we anticipated for this year was the 2,070,000. So if we would have a circumstance, we generally do carry some unfunded appropriation and overtime for instances like with the public health emergency, where we did have some staffing shortages. We might have to reallocate some funds to overtime in order to cover, shifts and shortages and things like that. So the 4.3 is just the appropriation, and then the lower 2 million. So we don't anticipate the spend being the 4.3 million.
But is there a problem with staffing where we're paying excess funds for overtime when, back to Representative Lunsman's question earlier, could we pay more money to these folks and get more people in there, and it would be less cost instead of paying overtime?
Well, we have been definitely trending in the right direction there, certainly from the CNA perspective. Nursing, as Secretary Putnam mentioned earlier, is the area we're focusing on now. So our improvements with the CNA direct care staff are what has allowed that overtime spend to kind of trend down recently.
All right, thank you.
Senator Flowers, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 144, and I don't know whether this is for Ms. Wallace or who can answer, but under the appropriation column, it's listed AU5, ARPA, IDEA supplemental grant. And I understand IDEA to mean Individuals with Disability Education Act. In the last fiscal year, it appears there's a balance of $1.5 million. If I'm reading this right, nothing was requested for the biennium. So what, can you tell me more about that grant, the purpose?
There
And,
were
and what's being done with those funds that were held over?
Well, they spent $1.5 million in that for that grant during the last fiscal year. Some of those ARPA grants have continued into the next fiscal year, some of them have not. And it's my understanding that those grants have to be requested, even if they do continue into the next year, they have to be requested every year through the peer subcommittee. So even if they do have, they wouldn't be requesting that for an additional year simply because they would have had to have, they're not requesting it through the traditional process here. They request it through peer because it's not supposed to continue on year after year after year after year.
Well, what's the balance?
That I do not know.
Well,
Can you get that information for her?
Yes. Yes, sir.
and then what was the purpose of the grant?
I'll let you guys handle that one.
I would have to get that information for you. I believe this is transferred over to the Department of Ed as a part of the First Connections movement from DHS to the Department of Education.
Senator Flowers, we'll make sure staff and the agency get you that information.
Yeah, I'd like to understand, you know, if something's transferred, monies are transferred to another department, I'm not understanding why they're listed under the budget without a notation of a transfer and how much of a transfer. And for what purpose? I really would like to know. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll get that information for you. All right, I think seat 39, is that Representative Unger? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question concerning the funds set aside for refugee resettlement.
Hold on.
All right.
You got 3 microphones. Put 1 or 2 of them on.
This is a question about the refugee resettlement program. You're good.
Now you're right.
There we go.
We got a mic. Maybe the fun guy that's running the mic. Yeah, Representative Richardson, if you'll get back in the well, I'll get you later. All right, now we're good to go.
Thank you, sir. In regards to the refugee resettlement program and the homeless assistant grant, do you have any idea of the number of people served by these monies set aside?
Mary Franklin, Director of Division of County Operations. I did bring those numbers today. In 2024 to date, there have been 130 individuals resettled through the refugee resettlement program.
Ma'am, if I heard you correctly, it was 130?
130 this calendar year to date.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Jay Richardson, you're recognized.
Never mind.
You got it? All right. Who's in 34? Representative Beatty, you're recognized.
Just to follow up on your last answer, the 130, were you stating for 2024, the 2 months of 2024, 130? And do you have numbers for 2023?
2023, 169.
You good, Representative Beatty? Okay.
And this may be fiscal year. I need to confirm that, whether it's calendar year or fiscal year. Yes, sir.
Representative Rose, you're recognized for a question.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I was just looking over this a little bit more, and I was just curious if you could comment on why the agency request is only $12,000 on the refugee resettlement program, and last year it was only $16,000 that was spent, but then we're budgeting and recommending $272,000. Just seemed a little unique to me.
So the number of refugees has increased 2021, it was a total of 9. So it has increased, although it's still not large numbers. And that particular line was to pay the cash assistance, the $81 a month. So we didn't need very much because there weren't very many refugees. And additionally, most of these individuals go to work right away and become ineligible for the cash assistance. And so we just haven't had to use it very much. We have increased, the amount has increased because the program has increased, even though it's still small numbers, there are more things we need to do to track information on these individuals, report information to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We also are funding the health assessments and the data tracking. So we just have a little bit more money now so that we can properly monitor and report for this program since it has grown.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think it would be of interest to have a little bit more of a breakdown of how it was spent and how you project that it would be spent in the year ahead.
Okay.
Is that something that you can provide?
Yes, sir.
And a breakdown of who has been served and how they've been served. Thank you.
Is that you again, Representative Lundstrom?
Yes, sir.
You're recognized.
I'd just like to follow up on the questions that have been asked. On the Refugee Assistance Settlement Program and homelessness assistance grants, how many people were served, but what is the cost per person? And I realize the agency cost might be, I've done the little math here, maybe $122. But what is the cost to the state in Medicaid, food assistance, TANF? What's the overall nut that we're looking at in cost for this homeless assistance program and the refugee grant? I'm having a hard time with the budget, looking at the numbers and knowing how many people are actually served.
Yes, Representative Lundstrom, we can put that information together for refugee resettlement and the emergency solutions grant.
Thank you.
Representative Ennett, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Franklin, can you provide information on how you dole out the money for the homeless grant per county? Because I'm interested in seeing how Pulaski County, seeing how much money that they apply for in the grant.
Yes, ma'am. We do a request for applications for that program each year, and community organizations across the state can apply for those funds. Mm-hmm. Now that COVID funding has ended, the grant has returned to normal size and normal requirements, including the match, which is a 1-for-1 match. So if you apply for funds, you have to have a match equal to that and show that you have spent it on allowable activities per this federal grant. So we take those applications and then we allocate funds based on the applications, and we do make an effort to try and, if we get applications across the state, to spread those funds across the state.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Rose, you got another question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your patience, Ms. Franklin. Appreciate your time. One other question I had for you with regard to the refugee resettlement program. Does that funding go to individuals or does it go to nonprofits? Or both?
So DHS does not do the case management portion of those services. We do the refugee cash assistance and provide the medical assistance, but the federal government subgrants or grants directly to an organization for those case management services.
Ms. Franklin, there were some other members. I know it's awkward, but they can't hear you. If you could talk,
I'm sorry.
Pull that mic over, or we got to shift that table down or something. Looks like a Washington hearing here this morning.
My apologies. Is this
Go
better?
ahead.
Okay. So I was explaining that DHS does not receive the federal funds to provide the case management services. Those are the services to get the individuals settled, housed, and help with job skills, getting ready to go to work, all those things you would think about of acclimating someone into the country that's a new Arkansan. DHS receives funding for the cash assistance and the medical assistance, and then we also receive some funds so that we can track the data. We can make sure that the health screenings, the health department helps and arranges for those health screenings, and just the admin of the staff now that spend some of their time, monitoring and helping with the refugee resettlement program. But the case management is directly between the organization here in Arkansas that's a private organization, nonprofit organization, and the federal government. Those funds do not flow through DHS.
Thank you. Representative Rose, you got to follow up?
Yes, sir, follow up. Just for the slow-minded amongst us, could you articulate to me, do any of these recommended, hypothetically, $272,000 worth of funds go to nonprofits in our state? I think that's a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. That's just what I needed, and you explained that well. Thank you. You should ask. Go ahead. I hate going back and forth.
Representative Rose, you through?
Well, I guess the last question is, can you give me a list of who those nonprofits are in the past or in the future?
Yes.
We'd like that with the other information that I've asked for. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for your
sir.
patience.
Thank you. All right. Well, we got a chance. We need a motion, executive rec on developmental disabilities. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It's approved. Ms. Walls, we're going to medical services. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, the next division is Division of Medical Services. Its department appropriation summary is on pages 162 and 163. This division administers payment to providers for services provided through the Medicaid, Medicaid waiver, and ARKIDS programs. For fiscal year 24, it has total authorized appropriations of $10.1 billion with 97 positions and 14 appropriations. The executive recommendation is for a total appropriations of $10.6 billion in fiscal year 25 with significant changes in 2 appropriations. If you'll turn with me to page 188. This is the private nursing home care line item of the Medicaid grants paying appropriation, which pays for expenses for Medicaid eligible beneficiaries of long-term care skilled nursing facilities, and it's funded through general revenues, federal revenues, and the quality assurance fee, which is otherwise known as the nursing home bed tax. The executive recommendation is for a $50 million increase up to a total of $1.01 billion in fiscal year 25, and it's being made to better align with the Medicaid biennial forecast. And if you'll turn with me to page 190, this is the summary for the hospital and medical services line item of the Medicaid grants appropriation, which pays expenses for all waiver services and any service not paid under any other Medicaid grants line item. It is funded through general revenues, federal revenues, and a variety of other state funding sources. The executive recommendation is for an increase of approximately $400 million to a total of $8.4 billion in this line item to better align with the Medicaid biennial forecast for fiscal year 25. And that concludes my presentation for this division.
Any questions for staff or the agency? Seeing no, take a vote. Representative Lundstrom, what are you doing over there?
Playing bingo.
You're going on and off and all that?
I'm debating. I have a question about the number of beds in Arkansas. I understand that we have, long before any of us were here and long before any of y'all were here, we have a requirement for only so many nursing home beds per county. And so we have some beds that are empty in South Arkansas and some people that are going waiting in Northwest Arkansas and Pulaski County. How is this going to alleviate that problem if we can't get people into beds, into nursing home facilities?
Good morning. I think we're going to have to get you some additional information. As you said, this was prior to most of us sitting here on the beds being restricted by county.
Yeah, there is you have to apply, and there's a population configuration, and we're limited on the number of beds, and so it stops any competition from coming in. It stops any nursing homes from expanding. So putting more money towards nursing homes, I'm not sure is a good idea if we can't expand to take care of our population.
Yes, ma'am. We will get you the detailed information by county and the details to how that is determined.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Chairman, for your indulgence.
Thank you, ma'am. Seeing no other questions, we need a motion on medical service for executive rec. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Stands approved. We're going to go now to quality assurance. Ms. Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next division is the Division of Provider Services and Quality Assurance, and its department summary, appropriation summary is on page 198. This division provides administrative support and oversight of providers enrolled in the Medicaid, Medicaid waiver, and ARKIDS programs. In fiscal year 24, it has total authorized appropriations of $21.4 million with 213 positions and 3 appropriations. The executive recommendation is for total appropriations of $21.6 million in fiscal year 25 with no significant changes. So we will briefly discuss the operations appropriation. It is on page 202. This appropriation provides for the administrative and primary salaried support of the division's operations, and it's funded through general and federal revenues, and the executive recommendation is for approximately $19.9 million in fiscal year 25, and this concludes my presentation for this division.
Any questions for staff or agency? We need a motion, executive rec. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Stands approved. We will now go to the youth services. Ms. Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The final division is the Division of Youth Services, and its department appropriation summary is on page 206 of your manual. This division was created to handle the problems of youth involved with the juvenile justice system through a variety of community-based and residential options for case management, diversion, and rehabilitation of at-risk youth. In fiscal year 24, it has total authorized appropriations of $82.9 million with 124 positions and 5 appropriations. The executive recommendation is for total appropriations of $83.6 million in fiscal year 25 with changes to 2 appropriations. If you will turn with me to page 214, that is the summary for the residential services appropriation, which funds residential services to juveniles committed to DYS, where they are assessed, then assigned to an appropriate, secure, or specialized treatment facility. This is funded through general revenues and various program support. There's an increase of $800,000 for costs associated with a higher census due to increases in the numbers of youth who are committed to DYS for an executive recommendation of approximately $34.6 million in fiscal year 25. And if you'll turn with me to page 216, this is the summary for their operations appropriation, and it provides for the administrative and salaried support of the division's operations. It's funded through general revenues, federal revenues, and various program support, and the executive recommendation includes a decrease of $250,000 in capital outlay that's associated with the one-time addition of facilities for the C-STEP program. And this takes the recommendation to $14.8 million in fiscal year 25, and this concludes my presentation of this division and the department.
Hey, we got a question. Representative Kavanaugh, are you for the staff or the agency?
Agency.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine's going to be on page 214, was its residential services for youth services fund account. We have an appropriation that's about 11 million over what the spend was. Are we looking for that much increase in how many kids are going to be, we think are going to be in DYS?
There we go. Good morning, Michael Crump, Director, Division of Youth Services. We do anticipate our numbers to be higher. Just to kind of summarize the way things went down, Our numbers decreased. They've been decreasing for several years, and during the pandemic, we hit a really low number. Then starting in 2023, the spring of 2023, we started seeing numbers of commitments that we had not seen in before my time. I've been just a little bit more than 5 years. We had not had numbers like that. So we're doing some things that we can do because we never know. We try to predict every year, but we don't know how many kids we're getting from day to day. We get the order and they show up at the front door. So we're doing some things on our end to try to get the numbers down, and I'm really hopeful about that, but we never know from one year to the next exactly how many we're going to be getting.
How many kids are in there now?
Total in DYS custody right now, I believe, was 372 this morning.
Okay. And do we know what the average cost per day is for to keep these children?
So for the ones that are in our most secure facilities, it's $320 per day.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have some other expenses, but it's mainly the $302 per youth per day. But then we also have some outside medical, pharmacy, some things like that are on top of that.
Okay, you said that was in secure. Is that the only?
We also have a number of youth who are waiting in a juvenile detention center because we don't have space in intake to put them all at one time. Those just range depending on, they're all county run, so they typically run around $90 to $100 per day. Then we also have some youth who are appropriate. It's not appropriate for all youth, but we have some that are in what we would call community type of group homes, for lack of a better word, especially. There's about 32 beds we have there total. Those are $140 a day for one type of home, and then $160 for the other, but we can't, they're a different type of setting, so not all youth are appropriate for that type of setting.
Okay, and what is your capacity? I know you say you got 372. What's your capacity?
It's a really tricky question, to be honest. We're way over what we would consider the ideal capacity in terms of, staffing and bed space, but you can certainly add staff if you have the funds, and if you're able to hire those positions, you can move things around, put more beds in. As long as you have enough staff to cover that, you can move more kids in and add more beds, which is what we've had to do. What we did because of the increase in numbers and staffing and beds is we did reopen one facility to be able to create a little bit of relief for our largest facility to get some kids there. We added a handful of group home beds for those youngest males in our custody, especially those elementary school age males that we have, to be able to get those off the campus. And we've just taken some other measures around discharges and things to try to get those numbers down. So at our largest facility, which is in Alexander, ideally we shoot for 100 kids in treatment, and 20 to 24 maybe in assessment. We were close to 200 several months back. I think now we're just over 160. So the efforts we've been making have been getting the numbers down at that facility to make sure that we have the stability and we're able to provide the resources there.
Okay, when you talk about your capacity, is it because you don't have the bed space or you don't have the staff? Because you're telling me you want 124, but you had 200. So that tells me you had the beds available, the actual beds that they could be in, but you don't have adequate staff for that number?
The staffing ratios, Rite of Passage that runs those facilities for us, they are able to hire staff and stay in ratio at those facilities for the most part. We do have fluctuations like anyone that runs any type of congregate care when it comes to nursing and teaching and all of those things. So sometimes the staffing levels fluctuate, but we've reached the point where we've taken advantage of just about all of the space we have at Alexander and the other campuses. We don't really have, even if we had more staff, I don't know that we would be able to put a lot more beds in those facilities at this point.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator Flowers, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're saying you have 372 in these correctional or treatment centers presently?
Correct.
So how many others are there that are placed in local juvenile detention centers?
I don't have that information, other than we have about 45 that are committed to DYS that are waiting in a juvenile detention center until their bed opens up, and so we can bring them into intake and then get them placed in one of our facilities as other youth leave. I don't have the information. There's currently 10 juvenile detention centers left in the state, so those other youth that have not been committed to our custody, or they're not part of my system, I don't have access to that information.
Well, are these, I think you said 45 are waiting to be placed in state facilities. So are they spread out, or where are they? I recall Jefferson County has an agreement to house a lot of these kids for DYS. And I've always been concerned about that. How many are down there? Do you know?
The number today, I could probably pull that up on my phone, but it's Jefferson County takes more than any other jurisdiction because they're willing, and they have 20. They probably have 27 or so of those kids last time I looked. Typically, in a lot of the other jurisdictions, the kids they're holding are kids from their jurisdiction who are waiting for a bed. So we have a few places that we have MOUs with, or an agreement to where we will pay that daily rate, but what we do is we just call when we get a youth committed, and if they have a bed available and we don't have space, they'll allow us to put a youth in that bed.
Well, I'm really concerned about this because Jefferson County has always had a lot of kids committed to DYS. That's been a big concern of mine. And I want to know, you've got commitments waiting for placement at DYS facilities. How do you ensure they're separated from youth that are in these detention centers for maybe just non-delinquent acts?
I don't know what type of youth they have outside. I only have access to who DYS is placing there. I don't believe they should have youth. I mean, you're not supposed to be able to put someone there for truancy or something like that, status offenders. I think what you see mostly, if I had to speculate on the other type of youth who are there, those are youth that the court decided to send to their own local juvenile detention center for a shorter period, perhaps, or someone who has not been adjudicated yet, so they're waiting on adjudication to decide what their ultimate placement is going to be. Sometimes that's with DYS, sometimes it might be probation. I mean, there's a number of outcomes that could occur.
So is it a flat fee? Did I hear you say $100 a day?
It varies from one juvenile detention center to the other. We have to pay the amount that they're willing to accept to be able to place youth there.
I'd like to get that information, Mr. Chair.
It is a daily rate. I'm sorry if I missed part of the question, but it is a daily rate.
We'll make sure staff, Senator, gets with you and gets you that information.
Yes, and if any additional funds are paid for children that might have some type of disability or some special need, is paid to these local detention facilities. I'd really like to know more about how do you all monitor this with these children. So I'd appreciate it, what you can give me.
We'll get the agency and staff to get with you and get you those answers. Thank you. Representative Shepard, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Crump. This is somewhat of a follow-up from Representative Kavanaugh and Senator Flowers. Could I be provided with a comprehensive list of where all DYS children are at, to include secure, residential, JDC, a list of where all the kids are at? And in addition to Representative Kavanaugh's question, Mr. Crump, I think you stated it was $300+ a day, but that excluded medical. Is that correct?
Some medical. So there are medical staff on site. There's nursing. They provide medication. If it's something minor, they're able to take care of that. They're also involved in the assessment process. There are therapists on site that provide therapy and do assessments. But you do have instances where something acute happens. It may be on the mental health side, or it may be on medical. If someone is injured, if they have an acute mental health need. So in those situations, we'll either take them to an emergency room or call and seek an assessment and placement outside. And that's when either if they go inpatient, if they have insurance or Medicaid, that will help cover the cost. But if they don't have that, or if they don't go to inpatient status when they go off site, that falls back to DYS. So just to give an example, if someone's playing basketball and hurts their arm and needs to go to the emergency room, that's going to fall back on DYS.
Correct. Follow up, Mr. Chair, really quickly. And I'm familiar with those procedures. Can we get an accounting of all funding that's being paid outside of what the contractors are getting for any type of extra expenses?
So as far as the DY, what we're spending on medical and pharmacy?
Yes, outside medical, pharmacy, mental health, outside of any monies that are being paid to the contractors.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Collins, you're recognized for question.
Thank you. So continuing with this, with such an increase, obviously showing such an increase in utilization, obviously there are drivers of this that have nothing to do with you guys, but are there have you guys studied in any kind of systematic way, or do you have any thoughts on things that are within the purview of DHS that can reduce the utilization of residential services, and what are those things, and have you reviewed whether the investments are sufficient in whether it's casework or whatever to prevent this from increasing in part because of insufficient investment in other areas?
That's one of the things we look at daily, so we do have involvement in those community-based services as well, prevention and diversion programs. Our community-based provider partners do a really good job out in the community. There's 10 of those. They assist, they go into the schools and the courts and try to help coordinate, provide some type of case management and other services, and just really connect families with that. We started back in October. Actually, we did a pilot before that, but intensive in-home services is something that we were able to start providing recently as a preventative measure. We only have a certain number of slots that we're able to use statewide, but what we did was made that available to the courts as an alternative. So if they see a youth that's struggling and getting close to the point where they might be considering commitment and they have some delinquency issues, they are able to make a referral to one of those providers to have that youth placed in that system and that for those services. So if you're not familiar with intensive in-home, they have staff, intervention specialists that have very small caseloads, so 3 to 5 families, and they work with the entire family. So what they do is they go out and assess, and they're in the home up to 3 times a week. They're on call 24/7, and so they try to address any issues that may be going on in the home if you have a youth that fits this criteria. So if it's something in the family surrounding employment or medical or substance abuse, whatever that may be, or sometimes just a matter of communication, they may try to help the family communicate a little bit better. And we've had a lot of good feedback. It's really early in the process, but the feedback I get from judges and others in the community is it's a really good program. They've seen a lot of positives, at least anecdotally, coming back from the families and when their kids come back to court who are receiving those services. So we are providing that. We're in the process of expanding our civilian student training program. It's an 8.5-week military style, but it's not a boot camp, but we have some elements of, we have a lot of former military that work there. And so judges are able to use that to give some youth the opportunity for that program as an alternative to committing them to DYS, which is typically a much longer period of time and a much more secure environment. We're always working with our community-based providers. We had an event this week with a lot of juvenile justice stakeholders just to work on what are some things we can do better. And we focused not on the custody side, but the focus was strictly on prevention, diversion, those kids that are out in the community, and what are the things that we can do better, and how can we get creative to seek those funds and those services to be able to provide those, because every jurisdiction, every juvenile court, every jurisdiction in the state, the resources and their needs are a little bit different. And so, they don't all necessarily have the exact same needs and things available to them. So we're trying to do what we can to be able to meet that need as much as DYS can, or at least point someone in the right direction.
Do you guys feel like you have the right mix of funding within your department, so we're not just cleaning up what's left here after those other programs are unsuccessful?
Yeah, so I will jump in. I think we are evaluating that day by day. We do have residential, we do have requirements. We're also looking at other prevention and diversion criteria, and also with intensive in-home and C-STEP, and then also trying to add community reintegration. We're trying to add a whole slate of services. So I think as we work through and hopefully the numbers come down for residential, that we can have that whole array of services and then be able to better answer that question for you.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we need a motion for the youth services for executive rec. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. We want to thank Ms. Secretary Putman and your staff, and you are now excused. We're going to education. Ms. Walden will come up.
Morning.
All right, members, get your seats. We're going to get started. Ms. Walden, you are recognized to start.
Thank you,
Well,
Mr.
let me say, you don't have a general statement that you want to start with, Secretary Olivia, do you?
Well, I'm not known to be shy for words, but we can go ahead and start, or I can just give
Whatever you want. If you got a general statement you want to make, or
Sure. I think just overall, I'd like to thank the legislative delegation for their support as we've been implementing what I consider to be the largest education reform that's happened probably throughout the United States for several decades. And it's hard to believe that about a year ago today, we were in committee meetings talking about how we were going to get this across the finish line. And as we go through the implementation phase and go kind of through our budget to give you updates, we've accomplished a lot of major milestones, and we've made a lot of difference for the students and families throughout the state of Arkansas. So I just want to say thank you, and we're excited to be here and engage in a wonderful dialogue this morning.
All right, Ms. Walden, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members. I'm Katie Walden, Bureau of Legislative Research Fiscal Division. Today, I'm going to be going over with you the 3 education divisions that receive public school funding, and I will only be going over the public school funding request. The first one we will go over is the Department of Education, Division of Elementary and Secondary Education appropriation. That begins on page 218 of your manual. And you can flip there, but also in your packet, I put together a schedule for you. It is item D. You'll find that in the manual, the line items within the public school fund are in fund center or appropriation order. So I just took everything that was in that manual and put it in this schedule, alphabetized by line item. So if you think of the line item you want to see, it's in alphabetical order. In just walking you through this schedule, on the far left, you'll see page numbers. That's where you can find a description of the line items in the manual. But you'll see the line item, you'll see the actual amount spent for the last full fiscal year of fiscal year 23. You'll see their budget and authorized amounts for fiscal year 24. And then on the far right, you'll see their request for fiscal year 25. And I highlighted the line items that have change levels. So just to go over with you, the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education for the Public School Fund has about 70 appropriation line items. This request totals $3.465 billion. They have 49 authorized positions for this appropriation. And funding for this appropriation is comprised of public school funding, general revenue, educational adequacy funds, existing fund balances, educational excellence trust funds, tax revenue, and TANF transfers. And this is the one that you think of when you think of all the state aid that goes to the schools, K-12 schools. There are a couple of line items that I want to bring to your attention today that have change levels. The first one is on the first page of your schedule. It is for AppScan. This is the Arkansas Public School Computer Network appropriation. It's on page 223 of your manual. AppScan's mission is to provide a statewide data communication network. They connect all the public school systems within the state and the co-ops. They provide electronic access for administrative computing services for the schools. The schools enter all their accounting information into that, and they also provide remote instructional services. The total recommendation is for $29.4 million in FY25, and this is an increase of about $33,000. This is just for pre-calculated adjustments in matching rates and salary adjustments that are provided in law. The next appropriation with changes is on page 2 of your schedule. It is the Office of Education Renewal Zones, and that's also on page 221 of your manual. This provides for the operation of the Education Renewal Zones, which is a compact between public schools, the educational co-ops, and institutions of higher education, and together they collaborate for the purpose of higher educational attainment for students. This recommendation totals $1.36 million in FY25. This includes an increase of about $2,000, and again, this is just for matching rate adjustments that are provided in law, so no real change level request for either two of those. Also on this page, you'll see some lines that are highlighted in blue. These are the 3 new lines that were established by Arkansas Learns. They are for maternity leave, merit teacher incentive, and minimum teacher salary and raises. Now, there are other line items in other division budgets that were also created by Learns, but we're only going over the public school fund lines today. And so you'll see at this time, there's no increase in these line items requested or recommended. We might see something later in the fiscal session, but nothing now. So this concludes my remarks on DESI. Mr. Chair, I'll take questions, and staff is here as well.
All right, we got questions. Representative Collins, your question for staff or agency?
It's for the agency.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 246, just looking at the public school fund balance, I know this is not anything new, but it's new for me to ask about it. So $234 million being requested. That's down a little bit from $339 million and $303 million. Why is that so large? And Are we intentionally spending it down? And if so, what are we trying to spend it down to? What do we think is the right place for that?
All right, so you're talking about the fund balance or excess appropriations? I just want to make sure.
Fund balance.
Okay, so yeah, the $300 million, we have a fund balance in the public school fund typically because when we make our recommendations, it's 2 years doing the adequacy study, which was the biggest driver. And so as we go along, we have carry forward authority in there, so we use that fund balance to balance the needs that we need for the following years. So we do try to bring that fund balance down. We usually try to keep it around $200 to $250 million. Just that keeps us from having to go back and asking for an ongoing increase of general revenue each year. So we play that balance in there to try to make sure we are keeping that down, not letting it get too high.
So in your ideal world, it would be about this level in perpetuity.
Yes, because if not, I would have to have the increase that we would need each year, depending on what adequacy increases may be, would have to include that increase of $300 or $250 million each year as well.
But if I look back at 22, 23, and 23, 24, both years it was around the same 300 million. So are you saying that you need it for 2 years to pay down the second year, or are you saying something else?
No, we look at each year and we try to, the request that we need for general revenue, we lower that by what that fund balance is once it gets over a certain amount to try to keep that fund balance the same, so we don't have a new general revenue request of $200 to $350 million. If I zero it out, then in RSA I would need that $300 million the next year to make sure that I have enough to spend for foundation funding.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Mark Johnson, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, I'm going to keep this brief. I promised the chair, since it was a non-budget question, I'll keep it brief and appreciate a quick answer. I have had a constituent that requested that I get some clarification for him dealing with his son, who is, I think, a rising sophomore in high school. He wanted to know about the requirement for public service volunteer hours. And I told him that I thought the department would have some guidance and some rules. Could you tell me where that's going to be and how tight or flexible it might be? Just a very quick summary.
Sure, thank you, Senator. That's something that we've put some commissioner members out and done some webinars to superintendents, because we've had a lot of questions on what qualifies, what doesn't qualify. And in fact, we did a workshop with the state board yesterday to go over the draft rules on outlining what is that reporting requirement and what are the school districts required to do to meet that 75 hours upon graduation. So we anticipate bringing those draft rules to our state board next Thursday to put out for public comment. But what you'll see in there is we want to be realistic and as flexible as we can. We're going to give the local school districts and administrators the amount of authority that they need to support students in meeting this requirement. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for students to get connected to their community. In fact, I want to applaud the several school districts that have been innovative and found ways to do school-wide community service projects, and we've heard feedback from students that has been overwhelmingly positive. But we're going to give the districts as much flexibility as we can. And then if they do have a circumstance or a student that's just not able to meet it, we've identified how they can exempt a student from that requirement, because the last thing we want to do is keep somebody from graduating from high school because of the community service requirement. But we do feel strongly that by participating in that community service experience is going to help that well-rounded education we expect everybody to deserve.
Okay, and that's a great answer. I look forward to seeing the rules in the next week or so. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Chesterfield, you're recognized for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Greg. Good morning, Jacob. How are y'all? Good.
Depends what questions you ask.
Yes. I'm noticing AppScan, and I was looking at the analysis here of what AppScan is supposed to do. And one of the things that I worked very hard for is to make sure that AppScan was also available to our Division of Youth Services. Because one of the problems that we had was that our children who were incarcerated were not getting the information from the school to the Juvenile Services Center and we weren't doing it from the Juvenile Services Center back to the school? Are they still very much a part of AppScan, or because it's not listed here as one of the entities that utilizes AppScan?
So I'm Greg Rogers, Department of Education. Forgot to do that the first time, sorry. Yes, ma'am. That we, in our accountability office, the Assistant Commissioner Hope Worsham, her and I had a conversation about that a couple of weeks ago, that we are working with those facilities to make sure they are reporting in AppScan and working with them to get them signed on and make sure they are reporting correctly and how that needs to work going forward. So yes, ma'am, we are working on that.
Okay, because there would sometimes be a 2-month gap between when the kid left the school, got to there, and if they got a good grade or something in the Juvenile Assessment Center, it would be a 2-month delay before it got back to the regular school. So I want to make sure that what we did put in place is still being utilized.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, we did something historic in raising the starting salary of teachers to $50,000. One of the things that is of concern, and I've gone several school districts across the state, what is the salary going to look like next year? Because we can't keep teachers at $50,000 year one and then expect them to work for the same thing in year two. Tell me what we're doing to make sure that there will be raises for those who are currently making the $50,000, what that can possibly look like for them going forward.
So one of the great things about the LEARNS initiative in prioritizing teacher salaries is the fact that we went from 48th in the nation to starting teacher salary to the top 5. Mm-hmm. Now we got to sustain that. And those are the questions we get from superintendents all the time. And I know the governor, and I believe this legislature, has supported those payments to be continued in perpetuity so that we can make sure that we recruit, retain, and recognize our most talented teachers. One of the things this budget does is increase the foundation funding, which may provide some flexible dollars, because determining that salary schedule is going to be up to the local school district, because they're going to determine a salary schedule to prioritize what they value in teachers, whether it's years of service, advanced degrees, specialized areas. And then I think part of that conversation as we go through the adequacy study, we're going to see how that comes out and then be able to come back, because we've definitely heard that across the board that we want to make sure that we value and recognize our educators, and that needs to be a priority.
Okay, and since we don't have a minimum salary schedule, we really don't know what that's going to look like, but we're anticipating then that the local school districts will take care of that. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, the school districts have reported for the teachers that are funded in the K-12 allocation that they have implemented a starting salary of at least $50,000.
Well, I know that part.
Right.
That's year one.
Right.
It's year two that seems to be troubling people. Where do we go from 50,000?
Right.
Because
they're going to build their budgets and prioritize at the local level with their school board on how they want to build out that teacher salary schedule. We're not putting in any minimum requirements beyond that.
But are we putting in any minimum money that would make it
There's
possible
a request
for them
for
to
an
do?
increase in the foundation funding, and then as you go through the adequacy study, that's something that can be determined by the legislature.
All right. Finally, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your patience. One of the things that is troubling so many education support professionals is they didn't seem to be thought about as we were putting this together. And if the buses don't run and the food is not served and the buildings are not clean, it's going to make it more difficult to educate children. What are we doing to say to our education support professionals, because we did not raise their salaries, what are we doing as far as funding is concerned to say to them that you may not be a teacher, but your role is equally important, because without you, the schools don't run? What are we doing money-wise?
First I'd say is you're 100% right. And I always talk about we take care of our educational family. And a lot of time when we think about staffing schools, most people automatically just think of teachers. The school districts hire everybody. They hire air-conditioned technicians, IT executives, paraprofessionals, food service, across the board. So as we go through the legislative process, working through adequacy and working with districts on their foundation funding, I think that's something that we want to make sure we prioritize as well.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Flowers, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the AppScan use. Is it for school districts utilizing the school dude program, going to the Division of Facilities and Transportation? Is that part of it?
school dude would be something that a school district may have acquired on their own to enhance what they're doing. That wouldn't be part of the ABSCAN data.
Well, my understanding is they're required to report
So that's
for maintenance purposes.
Yes, ma'am, Senator. That's under the partnership program, though, that the districts are required to have a facilities maintenance schedule. And it used to be school dude. It's not school dude anymore. That's on the facility side.
I'm sorry, it's hard for me to hear that this conversation going on over here.
So I'll try to get closer.
Okay.
Okay, so the school dude program is on the facilities and Division of Academic Facilities and Partnership side. That is a contract, and it's not school dude anymore. I've forgotten the name of the contract we have now, but there is a requirement that districts use that to show their maintenance and scheduled maintenance they have for their buildings, but that's not in ABSCAN. That is that's within the partnership program side. ABSCAN is used for there's two sides to ABSCAN. One side is the e-school side, that's the student side, where that's the student grades, student information, all that is entered into the e-school side. And then the other side of ABSCAN is the e-finance side, and that is the accounting system that all school districts are required to use, reporting their revenues, expenditures, and so forth. Their teacher contracts and all that are in e-finance. So that's what ABSCAN does.
So will we see an appropriation and a recommendation for the computer network between schools and the Division of Academic Facilities and Transportation in their budget?
That is a contract we have that's in that is an appropriation that you will see. It's not in the public school fund. That's in the Division of Academic Facilities and Transportation.
Okay, and then, Mr. Chair, I have another question. On page 246, the funding source is listed as education, it looks like facility partnership fund transfer of $20 million plus dollars. Can you explain that to me?
So yes, ma'am. Back when we first started the Academic Facilities and Transportation Partnership Program, there were 3 programs within Public School Fund that were helping at that time pay off the different bonds and different payments that districts had for facilities back. I don't remember when it actually started, but as we pay off those, or as it's supplemental bond assistance, general facilities funding, and I can't remember the other one right now, but it's in here. As we pay those off, there's a balance left, and that balance is transferred to partnership funding to allow us to have more money for help schools replace buildings or renovate buildings that they need.
Would that not go to the Division of Academic Facilities and Transportation?
Yes, ma'am.
So is that where this is being transferred, this 20 million plus?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, we're not on that budget yet, so
right.
I'll just
correct.
Wait. Thank you.
Representative Kavanaugh, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is going to be, if you could just verify this for me. On page 247, there is the Educator Compensation Reform Program. It had a fund balance of $7.9 million. It looks like that has been transferred into the public school fund. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell me what that was used for?
That was the program that first started when we were raising the minimum teacher salaries to $36,000.
So we've moved this in there so that it helps with the teacher salary in the LEARNS Act. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Garner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank y'all. I've got a couple of questions just to clarify. One is, first of all, thank you for being on the task force or the strategic planning committee for maternal health. That's awesome. I'm excited about it. And so I was really excited to see maternity leave in the LEARNS Act. And then I keep hearing that we're not actually paying half of the cost, we're paying half of the cost of a substitute. Is that true? And if so, how are schools going to afford to pay teachers to stay off for maternity leave?
So, great question, and thank you. So one of the benefits that we want to add, because it is part of teacher recruitment and part of our incentivized to recognize our teachers, was to offer this maternity program. So we're still in the rules development process for that, but we have been giving guidance on how that they could balance for that. But many districts already have built into their budget the full cost of the salary. So the additional supplemental would cost those additional expenses, whether they need a long-term sub or a short-term sub, where the district would provide in their plan how they would make that match. So it's going to be a little bit nuanced and different from district to district as we've been navigating it. But there's some of these aha moments that we've had along the way. So as we go through and with further implementation, there may be an opportunity to go deeper into how we want to provide this support. I wouldn't say we fully arrived on the landing place of how we want to implement this and see this happen. I think we're starting to navigate conversations, but we're getting really good feedback from districts on how we think we can make this better. Great. And I do agree there's some work to be done in this area.
Great. Another question? Thank you, Mr. Chair. My second question, thank you for that clarification. My second question is I'm getting some feedback from the meeting yesterday for the co-ops and the fact that those 60 positions maybe have been reallocated, or the money for those positions. Could you just explain
So
how that's, because the funding hadn't changed, it doesn't look like. We're reallocating those funds.
So our educational co-ops,
60 people.
our educational co-ops have been receiving funding from the state, and I want to be perfectly clear, if whether it's co-ops, school districts, or anybody in the state thinks that we're just going to do business as usual and fund positions because that's what we've always funded, and we don't have a return on that investment, they need to know we're going to have a deeper conversation. That is not an entitlement appropriation. So we have let these co-ops know, don't just guarantee and expect you're going to get this funding. We're going to reevaluate how these districts are being supported, because the reality is literacy and numeracy data hasn't been improving in the last decade, but we've been just giving dollars out the window. So we officially let them know, we may not be giving you these dollars the way you've always received them. We're going to reevaluate and make sure we're having a great impact on what's best for students, and that's what we're always going to maintain our focus on.
I get that. I'm just wondering what we're reallocating those funds for.
To support those, what they were exactly designed for. We're talking about supporting literacy, science, and math initiatives. We're going to support those initiatives. We may not just be doing it the way we've always been doing it.
So not through the co-ops, but we're still going to have GT programs.
Well, absolutely. We're going to make them stronger. What's happening is we're just giving money to co-ops, and those dollars are getting watered down and not being used intended the way they were designed to be used. We're going to make sure these dollars are being used the intended way of their purpose, and we're actually going to be elevating the support we're giving to districts, I think, at a much more cohesive manner instead of a fragmented, uncoordinated process that we've been following.
Exactly, but thank you.
Representative Ladyman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm over here. My question is about the merit teacher incentive. I get a lot of questions about that program, and if I'm looking at this right, we had money allocated this year and we didn't spend any, and we have that same amount, 10 million, for next year. Now my question is, are we going to be able to use that money and spend that money, because these seasoned teachers out there, feel like they've been left behind. We've got money allocated. So do we have promulgated rules what are the incentive programs? And I know that's a deep subject, but can you give me a summary of how we're going to implement that and how we're going to spend that $10 million to help our seasoned teachers?
Yeah, great question. And I'm glad you brought it up, because that's one of those things where you say we want to recognize and reward our most talented teachers, but developing a method to do that, it gets really nuanced. So I always want to remind the legislative delegation, as we were kind of going through the rules process or through the LEARNS process, we made a commitment as an agency when going through the rules promulgation that we would establish work groups and get their feedback and input. So those work groups have been meeting, and in fact, that's one of the draft rules that we took to our board yesterday, is to kind of outline the process, because we do intend to award those dollars. And I want to give the educators and the administrators and the folks that came together on that a lot of credit for being creative, because when you look at measuring impact on student performance, it's different. And I even shared this story with our state board. You know, I look at some of the teachers that had the greatest impact on me as a young junior high student. I think one of the programs I learned the most out of as far as life skills or transferable skills was in concert band, right? So if that's not a tested subject area and you're trying to measure impact, that's really hard to do. So this work group was really creative in looking at almost like a tiered approach that starts with, are you a highly effective teacher? Are you mentoring other teachers? It's stackable on what you can be recognized. Are you in a geographically challenged location? Do you teach a hard to staff subject area? Do you have evidence of impact? And we're going to send those rules to our state board to put out for public comment. I'm sure we'll get more creative input, but our intention is to get that across the finish line, because those dollars deserve every penny that we can give them. Those teachers do, I mean.
So you will be bringing those to us at some point?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Representative Hawk, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you for being here and all the work you're doing in our public schools and for school choice. My question comes from a number of our districts in Northwest Arkansas about the school lunch program and the surplus commodities. It is not achieving the balance between the federal and state reimbursements for them, and so they're carrying over a deficit in their spending locally. And I just wondered if you could talk to if that is being addressed and how best they can meet that demand to provide free and reduced lunches and yet still have some surplus that is not being funded. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to go on, but I think that's a really good question that probably has a little bit complicated, nuanced answer. And I'll say, as I don't know if we know the answer to that question right now, but I do think that's something that we need to work together to look at, because no child should go hungry, and school districts are never going to let a child go hungry. And they are getting those unintended expenses that are probably coming out of their general revenue to make sure they're meeting the basic needs of those students. So that may be an area that we need to identify an opportunity, and how do we fill those shortcomings. I don't know if I know the answer to that right now, but those are very real realities and concerns that school districts face each and every single day.
Senator Petty, you're recognized for a question.
Sorry. All right. Thank you.
There you go.
Sorry about that. I have just about 3 questions. First of all, I appreciate the work that you and your team are doing, and just want to encourage continued progress like we're seeing here. Just and I know that this is kind of a lagging number, but the declining enrollment districts. Just want your thought on, with the LEARNS Act and the educational freedom accounts and kind of the availability of those. What do you see, just big picture, that fund looking like maybe in the future, as I think we're in 22 now, but as we fully implement the LEARNS Act, what are your thoughts on the effect, if any, on future budgets for that line item? And then I have a couple of others.
I think you bring up a good question, and those are questions that districts ask all the time. So as we go through, we're in year 1 of implementation. I don't want to make assumptions about those patterns in dollars. We want to look at the data, and as we're finishing that first year, we're going to have hard numbers. We're getting ready to open the window for year 2. I believe that starts at the beginning of next month. We're going to be able to have real hard numbers. But then we're also, encouraging districts to work with families. If I tell superintendents, I said, if you're getting large numbers of students saying that their parents are looking for other options, that at what point do we look in the mirror and say we need to do a better job meeting the needs of our students and our families? So I don't anticipate, and I haven't seen or heard from districts where they're losing large amounts of students in Great Groves that they're not anticipating. In fact, many of our higher performing districts are seeing increases in enrollments. I think geographically, there's some regions in this state where there's declining enrollment, but there's some other economic impacts and concerns in those areas as well. So how can we rebuild communities is part of that conversation. So as we go forward, I think you're right. We need to look at the data, look at those dollars, and make sure that we're meeting the needs of those school districts.
Mr. Chair, a couple more. Thank you. And I agree. I was just curious on that one. And this is more of a comment before I get to my next question on co-ops. I'm a very rural district for the most part, and our smaller districts probably rely on co-ops more so than some of the other larger, more urban areas. And so I would hope that we would have the opportunity when funding may be reallocated, and maybe rightfully so, to your point earlier, we have that conversation as to where it goes, and it doesn't just end up meshed together with some other fund somewhere. And so
sure. And I want to say too, because I get asked this question a lot. I'm a big believer in educational co-ops as well. I was a former rural superintendent, and we had consortiums that we had to rely on. A small school district has to meet all the same state and federal requirements that a large district does. Larger districts may have capacity to do a lot of that in-house. A small rural district doesn't. They need to rely on those co-ops. But the co-ops also need to be effective in the support that they're providing districts. And I think as we move forward and look at opportunities, how do we help support co-ops, but then also hold them accountable for student performance as well?
Absolutely. And then the last question, just a clarification, you had mentioned an increase in the state foundation funding. You were referring to over the FY23 to the 24 and then 24 to 25, because 23-24 and 24-25 are the same as I see it here. There is no increase in foundation funding for 24-25 right now, as I see it. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, sir, Senator Petty, the budget request that we received did not include any increases in foundation, but as we learned yesterday, the governor has provided in her balanced budget an increase of about $35 million to the foundation aid in recommended funding. So we may see an associated governor's letter with that in the fiscal session to include that increase.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Representative Duke, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, if that's all right. My first question is in regards to the LEARNS money and the salary, getting the teachers up to the $50,000. My understanding is that in growing school districts that have to add a teacher, that they are not receiving any of that money to get that teacher up to that $50,000, that is their responsibility. And if that is correct, are we going to be looking at something to do to help them? Because that is a significant budget issue, and obviously you need to get them up there to that. And to follow along with that one, the concern, or I guess I don't know if I would say frustration, is there were school districts across the state that worked really hard to maximize their classroom space and their teachers' space. So they utilized split classes and things like that to be able to pay better salaries because they maximize their space. And because of that, they feel a little bit of a penalty because they didn't just go ahead and open up a first grade and a second grade classroom. They did a first and second grade split. And if they had done that last year, even though there may have been 10 kids in that class, they would have that $50,000. And so is that a nuance that you guys are looking at? And I know that you know that it's an issue. Are you anticipating trying to find some way to address those issues? I think those kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think the short answer is I think we have to, right? And as we went through with implementation, when you're trying to implement something in year one that's so bold and so innovative and so historic, there may be an unintended consequence where there are some winners and some losers. And now that we can run hard data and hard numbers, we can probably readjust, because we have school districts that are losing enrollment, which means they may not need as many teachers, so their allocation may need to be adjusted, as well as school districts that are gaining teachers and their dollars are going to go up. So while they may get additional funding for additional enrollment, there may be some offset balances. So I think we've done a really good job. School districts have been really creative and innovative implementing year one. But as we're now being able to collect the data and looking forward, and as we go through the process with recommendations on the budget for kind of year 2, year 3, and beyond, having a process that will help shore up those shortfalls and pitfalls is something that I think is a natural ongoing conversation.
May I follow up? So you do anticipate it looking into broadening that pot of money up to those new additional teachers that have been added in some of those school districts?
I would be looking to make a recommendation to bring to the legislature to say these are some things you could put in place if you have the appetite to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question is, there is nothing precluding districts at this point in time, if they wanted to do their own teacher incentive rewards, could they do that as well on top of what the state is doing? If now a school district decides, I want to reward the band program or somebody else, they can give bonuses themselves if they can do that fiscally on their own. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, there are many districts that are doing that. In fact, we actually have some districts in this state that have applied for some federal grants to do just that, and they're doing some pretty innovative things as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Wooten, you're back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I understand that we've made tremendous progress with starting salaries, but the biggest complaint I hear is about the fact that a teacher that has 24 years in the classroom and is considered a good teacher, an outstanding teacher, she got a $1,200 raise. That's all she got. And she will mentor a teacher fresh out of college that makes $50,000 a year, her first year. I think that's unfair. I know that we need to, I can't say that as criticism of a teacher getting $50,000 a year, because they all deserve more to get. But I'm part of what the governor calls status quo. And let me assure you, that doesn't bother me a bit. Because I'm thinking about the other 440,000 kids and not those that are being sent to a special school, not a special school, but to a private school. My first question is, what are you going to do about those salaries?
Sure. So first, the status quo for you is ranked us 43rd in the nation. So to me, that's not good enough. We need to do something innovative. We need to do something bold. We need to do something different. Second, every teacher in the state was funded last year to get at least a $2,000 raise. So if you have a teacher that's saying they only got $1,200, I would ask that district, what did they do with the dollars that the state provided
Let's
them?
don't blame it on the district.
Well,
Because
but the state funded a $2,000 increase.
I'm not going to argue with you about the districts. They're doing the best they can with what they've got. And they're in a situation and a system that is unfair to them. Some of the, particularly the smaller schools. So let's don't blame it on you.
I'm not blaming. I'm saying the question, you said you had a constituent that said that they're mentoring new teachers and they only got a $1,200 raise. I would ask that constituent or the district that the constituent works in, how was the teacher salary allocation allocated? Because that local school board took the dollars that were given to that district and built the salary allocation. That's what I would ask them, because they should have gotten at least $2,000.
Well, I'm asking you, what are we going to do to help fund the districts that can't afford that, but yet those students need to be taught? So what are we going to do? Are we going to increase teacher salaries?
Part of the recommendation is to increase the foundation funding and then work with the legislature through adequacy to determine what that amount is.
Okay. You have 106 vacancies that are 2 years or older in your department. Can you give me an age of those positions? Is it 2 years, 4 years, 6 years? And why do they remain vacant? And how many of them are budgeted? I
don't know if I'll let Mr. Rogers answer the number of the ones that are budgeted. these vacancies cover multiple different divisions within our agency. So we in that isn't necessarily just the Department of Education. We support a lot of other divisions, whether it's early learning, the Northwest Technical Institute. Some of those vacancies are within there. Some of those have been put on hold, basically to see if we need to fill them at this time, or is this something we can wait for budget questions or concerns. Some have been vacant for a while because they're hard to staff areas and they are intended to be filled. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a shelf life, but as we've kind of gone through our agency, we're looking at every position, and before we just randomly approve a position that we've always had, we go through a process and evaluate whether that's a priority position and whether that's going to have a direct impact on students. And those are the ones that we prioritize in filling. Maintaining positions just to maintain big government is something that we're not going to continue to do.
How many positions have you turned back in?
We'd have to research that.
Okay, would you mind to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Representative, we'll make sure you get that information.
Next question is, what is the total cost, additional cost for LEARNs? Comparing that to what we had before we adopted LEARNs.
I don't know. I'm not sure if I understand what the question is. Like for the different programs associated with LEARNs, as far as
how much additional money has been spent or is dedicated to LEARNs?
Ms. Walden.
Mr. Chair.
You're recognized.
Representative Wooten, I can share that of the budgeted LEARNs appropriation items, so far this fiscal year, $213 million has been spent this fiscal year of the LEARNs items, and appropriated for FY25, the recommendation for budgeted items is $322 million.
So that you can't tell us how much LEARNs itself is cost from the changes that have been made.
I mean, yeah, I could, if you wanted to go down each line, I could put that together and show how much this year we've spent to that. But like where she's talking, 190 million of that was the salary increases. So I know that in public school fund for the teacher equalization, it was about $190 million. That was to get to that 50,000 or that $2,000 increase. 31 million was for EFAs. I'd have to put it together. I can think through it and put it down, but I don't have that on, but I can get that.
Well, let's go to that another way. Mr. Secretary, what do you think it's going to cost in year 4 and 5 of LEARNs?
Our intent is to maintain as level funding as we can and continue supporting these initiatives in reciprocity. So when we look at what this investment is, it's an investment over time that if you would look at what we were requesting from the legislature historically year after year with a 2 to 3% increase, if we keep this flat, it would catch up in about 4 to 5 years and just be part of that foundation funding.
Under the Adequacy Act?
Perhaps, yeah.
All right. One more question. Will we, or will you publicly show the test scores for private schools versus public schools? Like you do in the paper now?
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to publish individual test scores, but if there's enough students to make a sample size, which is typically 10, so that you can not have it identifiable, that's just standard practice, we would be able to post the scores of those students by the subject areas that they took the exams in, if there's enough students to take that assessment.
Will you provide the test scores?
Yeah, we required it to be posted on the private school's website.
Okay, does it require that private schools, can you pinpoint those students that were in public schools and compare their grade scores to what they had in public school versus what they have in private schools? Have you got funding for that? 'Cause
I would have to check with our
fiscal.
Yeah, I'd have to check with our data warehouse to see how they can do that, because you're moving from one data system to the next, and getting that student matching may be a little bit more nuanced and complicated. But to answer the question, the private schools will be posted their aggregate test scores for their students on their website.
Of all the students, but not those that were in public school and took their voucher to a private school.
I'd have to check with our data team. I don't know if they were able to build that report.
Well, how are you going to handle the
Representative Wooden,
Yes, sir.
I gave you a lot of latitude. You're filibustering now.
All right, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Secretary.
Senator Flowers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the education renewal zones, can you speak a little bit about that? Reading the description, it said it's particularly used for public schools that are in distress.
I'm sorry,
I'm looking on page 221.
Senator Flowers.
Yes.
Get a little closer to your mic. I think
I'm right here on it.
There you go. Now I can hear you.
All right. Thank you. I want to know more about the education renewal zones, particularly since it indicates trying to collaborate with higher education institutions and public schools to bring up academic standards, particularly in distressed public schools. So, I'm not sure what the status is of the Pine Bluff School District at this point. I think we're on the way out of state takeover. I think there's some kind of link still there. Do you have an education renewal zone down there in Jefferson County at Pine Bluff School District?
So what I think we could do for you in that regard is maybe provide an overview of all the work that they've done. I don't have in front of me specifically which districts they're working with, but I know they're a partnership with all of our higher ed collaboratives and their education, teacher preparation programs, education programs, and they do a lot of professional development with principals and teachers and leaders across the state. So it'd probably be a good idea to maybe just get you like a little snapshot report overview of some of the major projects that they've worked on and accomplished. Because I don't know if we have it broken down specifically by which districts participated, but they may have that information for you.
Well, I'd like to know, where are these education renewal zones? I realize that in Pine Bluff, I don't ever recall them not collaborating with service co-ops, these education service co-ops. So I'm wondering, what is the expected result, and what has been the impact of this collaboration with institutions of higher education or these service co-ops, particularly in the districts where you have the distressed school district?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and Chair, we'd be happy to pull together some data and report and share with the delegation.
I would appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If you get back with the senator, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Looks like Representative Lundstrom's back up.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate your attitude. I'm sorry, I'm over here. Because we've always done it that way is not a good way to do it. That better is going to require some excellence and some stress. Could we go back to the consolidation thing? There's two different lines for consolidation. On line 233 and line 237, it's a consolidation incentive and a consolidation, there's two different, there's an incentive fund and then there's a consolidation fund. Could you explain to me, that's a lot of money for declining enrollment districts, 237, and consolidation of 233. Could you give me a little more information about those two things? They seem to be kind of similar.
So, yeah, consolidated incentive fund is where if there's a situation where two school districts choose to consolidate in with each other, then the consolidated district that takes over the other district. So there's one, you have A and B district. When that district becomes C, the money that the ADM for District A, they will continue to get for another 2 years to make sure that because the ADM is paid on last year's three-quarter ADM, and we don't have that any longer once you become C. So the consolidated incentive program allows for us to make a runway for that district to not lose any ADM funding.
Okay. And then consolidation, have we consolidated any schools so far?
I don't know. I'd have to get that for you.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Then back on distance learning, you have two lines for, we have two lines for distance learning, a 229 and a 239. One is, I understand, operations. How many students are we serving long distance with the distance learning? And are we testing those students?
I don't know how many students, I'd have to get if they're student, because those are mainly grants to the co-ops that work with our IT coordinators that help with the districts for their district learning. If a district has an online class they're offering, so that's a partnership that we do through the co-ops. But I can see how many kids are in those. I could try to get how many kids have the online classes that are taking those, but I don't have that with me today either. But I can get that.
So we have a lot of different lines for the co-ops. Is there a way to pull that information together of what we're actually doing, and are we getting the bang for the buck?
I think that's exactly what the secretary was talking about earlier that we are working on right now.
All right, that sounds great. And then schools have the incentive or have the opportunity if they have a principal, assistant principal, curriculum coordinator, all these. We seem to have a lot of chiefs and very few Indians. Do schools have the opportunity to say we don't need 2 or 3 assistant principals or curriculum principals or coordinators and can put that money towards teacher salary?
I think ultimately that's a district decision that they could make. The way the funding matrix works, they may allocate, you get funded for so many positions, but that's how much dollars you receive. But how they allocate that formula and to turn that into a staffing plan would be up to the school district.
Okay, so there's no roadblock for them to do that type of thing. They don't have to have a whole lot of folks. I just want to make sure there's no roadblocks.
Now there are some criteria and rule that may not be listed out administrative-wise if you're looking at that, but as far as staffing ratios for class size and media center requirements, school counselors, some of that is part of our standards of accreditation, but not like the number of people you need at the district office or in the front office. I don't believe that's part of that matrix.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Collins, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over here. What do you estimate that we'll be spending on just the private school vouchers piece in year 4 to 5 of LEARNS?
So I think that's a good question. My understanding of the intent, and I'll let Mr. Rogers jump in, is that there's a finite number in the budget that when we hit that number, that's the amount of scholarships that are available. This past year, I don't remember the exact dollar amount that we've had in the budget for the appropriation, but we were under that appropriated amount for this current year by the number of students participating. As we go into year 2, this budget recommends to double that allotment because we think there may be more families participating. That window for the number of families that are going to apply and open goes in next month, so we'll have a little bit better number. But once that allocation is hit, there's a ceiling in that allocation, and I don't remember what the exact dollar amount in this recommended budget is, but as we work with the legislature, that's going to be set with the legislature.
Well, hold on just a second. My co-chair has something to say.
That'll be up to us in a sense. And so we set those thresholds, and that's the way the language was written into LEARNS. And so if we, in the end, only allocate through revenue stabilization, $50 to, EFA accounts, and it's $50 that has to be figured out at that point. And then they were giving discretion to create new rules essentially on how those are allocated. And so if they wanted to focus on different levels of need, whether it be poverty or disability issues or whatever, they could then redefine underneath that. But we will be the ones ultimately to set that 3-year threshold of the maximum amount that can be spent on EFAs.
Sure, and I appreciate that. I guess I would say, I mean, there may be a level that you would be requesting or anticipating to be requesting given what you are projecting for year 4 or 5. I mean, I would have to think there would be, if you're projecting overall approximately level budget, I mean, you've got to have something built in there to fill in for the EFA piece. So do you have any kind of a ballpark for what you'll be requesting or anticipate be requesting at that point?
I don't think we have that number in mind right now. So that's something I could take back with our leadership team and see if we can figure out more for you.
Yeah, I would be interested. Thank you.
Representative Jay Richardson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's go again. There you go.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. I got really two super simple questions. On the handout that's out on page 2, on the isolated funding, how many school districts are getting that funding right now? Do you know?
No, I'd have to look and tell you because isolated funding was written and there's specific school districts. It's for specific school districts in that, and I'd have to see how many of those are still in existence. I don't have that, but I could get that for you.
Okay, I would assume that it's probably gone up since 2005, but it may not have.
No, it hasn't. So
it hasn't.
When
Okay.
isolated funding law was originally done,
Okay.
there was districts that were listed in there. There were a lot of the smaller rural districts that received the isolated funding, and that list has gone down.
Okay.
Those school districts either consolidated or moved in with other districts. So that's not that list doesn't change.
Okay.
Once that list was established, that's who's getting isolated funding. And as those districts no longer are there, the fund balance for that isolated funding amount goes to the special needs isolated funding. Now, in that one, there are different districts that can be added based off the situation that they need for that isolated funding if they meet the criteria for receiving that special needs isolated funding. But as far as the isolated funding, if you look in the law, it's got a listed like a page of school districts that received that isolated funding when it first was established.
Okay. So with that and with the potential reduction of those school districts, then so what you were actually did in FY 2023 and then what you guys have budgeted, it's like 3x the difference in that. So why would you go up so much and you've got districts that have fallen off?
Which one? Where?
On page 2, right above the blue lines, 231 isolated funding.
So the total authorized for that budget is $7.8 million. We spent $2.2 million last year in it. And so that balance goes over to the special needs isolated funding. That isolated funding is the one that I'm saying there, that it will never, the $7.8 million will never change. Because there's never going to be any more schools that qualify for that isolated funding amount.
Okay, I got you. Thank you very much.
Representative Andy, you got a budget question? Okay, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the at-risk category. Was that 225? Can you explain what is at-risk and how is it distributed to the different school districts, the money?
So the at-risk money is used for helping students when they're preparing to take the ACT. They can use that. It helps for, I don't remember how many hours of instruction, but they can qualify that to get help with the ACT scores. I don't have I can get it to you. I'm trying to remember from and I'm failing right now, but yeah, that's what it's for, is to help with the ACT scores.
Thank you.
Representative Springer, you have a question?
Yes, sir. For you, are members of the committee, are we going to receive those requested documents that have been asked for today? Other members?
Yeah, we're going to get them out to the members.
All right. Thank you. That's
Thank
right.
you. All right, members, seeing no other questions, we'll entertain a motion for executive rec. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Public schools is approved. And we're going on now to state libraries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving to page 4 of your schedule, this is the public school funding for the state library. The appropriation request in the manual is on page 251. And as you can see, this is the aid that is given to all the local libraries around the state. The request and recommendation is for this appropriation to remain flat at $10 million into 25. But also, as you can see, they're only budgeting and have received funding for $5.6 million in the last fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my remarks on the State Library Public School Fund.
Any questions for staff or the agency? Senator Payton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this is the proper time to ask, but how many libraries qualify for this? And I think we had done some special language in the last session to try to broaden the spectrum of who could qualify. I'm just wondering what the status is on that, and how it's affected by this appropriation.
Sure. Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to bring Jennifer Chilcote over, who's our Director of State Libraries, and would be able to answer any of those appropriate questions.
Ma'am, if you'll identify yourself, you can answer the question.
Jennifer Chilcote, Arkansas State Library. Senator Payton, I have a spreadsheet with me. It's not numbered. Most of the libraries in the state that are qualifying libraries do receive this. Well, all of the ones that qualify do receive state aid under the current standards. We are aware of the amendment that was and the charge that we were given to increase the number of libraries that do receive state aid to include some that have been ineligible in the past. We have a set of rules that are currently with ADE leadership for their review before they go on to the governor. And so we anticipate that we will be adding new libraries to the eligibility list in the next fiscal year, in the 25 fiscal year.
So at this point, the number of libraries hasn't changed, but we're proceeding towards that goal.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Sullivan, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. How does one qualify to receive state aid, and who makes those qualifications?
The the State Library Board has set those qualifications before. There are actually numerous qualifications, including the one that is at issue that Senator Payton was concerned about had to do with the way in which the libraries are funded. They're in current standards. It is required that the library have a minimum of $1 million in public funding to support them. That has in the past disqualified certain libraries from being able to receive state aid because they are too small.
Pardon me. Maybe I asked the wrong question. I apologize. So is the policy promulgated? So once you have all those criteria, are those criteria promulgated, or is it just up to the discretion of the library board?
They are promulgated.
Okay, thank you.
And so we are waiting on new rules to be promulgated.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no other questions, we'll entertain a motion for executive rec on the library. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? That is approved. And we're going to our last one, which is the career technical education. Ms. Walden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 5 of the schedule that I prepared, item D, you'll see the public school fund request for the Division of Career Education. There are 4 line items, and they begin on page 255 of your manual. They include vocational startup grants, vocational center aid, career education services, and the career coaches piece of the public school fund. As you can see from this schedule, there are no requested increases for any of these line items, and So there's no recommendation for an increase. One thing I do want to mention to the committee today, even though within this schedule there's no increase, on that second line, vocational center aid, that's set at $21.8 million, and it's at this time to continue at that same amount. We also learned yesterday that in the governor's balanced budget, she recommended a $4 million increase for this line to increase the funding for those career centers in the districts. So we might see a governor's letter at some point, but this is what the request is today. Those conclude my comments, Mr. Chair.
All right, members, we have any questions? Representative Hawk, you're recognized for a
Thank you.
question.
Thank you for all the work you're doing, and career and technical education is very important to all of our school districts and our students. 70 to 75% of our students can really benefit from that training and go directly into the workforce. So thank you for coming up and speaking to us on these issues as we continue to work on this, Mr. White and Mr. Worden, especially Dr. Oliva, thank you. But my question is the definition of a vocational center aid and how many of those are technically called that and how many of them are, this is so hard to find out how to get this aid to the right locations and to those students that really could benefit from career and technical education funding.
Ken Warden, Division of Higher Education. I have with me Ross White, our Director of Career and Technical Education. As you may recall, the Division of Career and Technical Education was aligned with Division of Higher Education last July in an effort to streamline and coordinate our K-12 and higher ed efforts. And so I'm really pleased to do that because I think it enables us to really elaborate or build out the vision of one continuum of education in our state. And I think there's efficiencies that you're going to see through this as we move forward. And to get to your question, I just wanted to start with that. And so people don't always associate the Division of Higher Education with career and technical education, but post-secondary education is post-secondary education. Bifurcating the two is a mistake. We're not going to do that anymore. So to your point, we have in your 31, is that better? We have 31 secondary career centers in the state. Those are regionally located so to best serve the state in its entirety. In a perfect world, we'd have a vocational technical center on every high school campus, but that's just really, with the economies of scales we have, is just not possible. So we have those regionally located, but the vast majority of those are attached to colleges or in some cases universities, so that the students attending those also receive concurrent credit, which is a big deal for us. We know there's a linear effect to concurrent credit education. A student that takes one concurrent credit class, no matter what it is twice as likely to receive a post-secondary credential as someone who doesn't. And there's a linear effect that the more hours that they take in high school, the more apt they are to receive a credential. So we want to lean into that and also try to grow that. Those were decided some time ago on the geographic location. The funding the way that's funded is the funds come to our division through this body and this budget process, but we pass those funds over to the Department of Commerce and the Office of Skill Development. The Office of Skill Development funds those centers based on full-time equivalency of the number of students that they have, and their board sets a tiered funding model so that certain degrees that are determined by that board to be high growth, high demand receive more funding than some of the others, and then they fund those students. So we actually they verify enrollment and do those things, but the money really passes through us, and that funding mechanism is coordinated and managed by the Office of Skill Development and the Department of Commerce. I hope that helps. I hope that answers your question.
Representative Collins, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If there's one thing I feel like we all agree on, it's that workforce is a huge issue in our state. We need a better educated, better trained workforce. So I guess I'm a little surprised that we have a flat budget here, and I'm wondering, do you guys feel like we're doing all we can and we don't really need to make any more investments, in this area? And If you don't, what would be an area that you do think that we should make some more significant investments?
So having taught automotive service for 9 years and being a big believer in career education and technical education, but the continuum of education, no matter where you measure, we're behind. But particularly in career education, building those devices out, but not so being sure that people understand that career education and higher education attainment are one and the same. They're not mutually exclusive things, and having pathways from technical degrees to bachelor degrees and beyond is a big deal. So to answer your question, I would love to see more investment in our colleges and universities and in career and technical education. I think it's one of the best ROIs that we have as a state is to, and for also wealth distribution, to grow our state's economy, but to also distribute so that all of our citizens are prosper and have the opportunity to do that through the path they choose to distinguish themselves, whether that's career related education directly to work, military, or traditional academic attainment.
Well, I would tend to agree, but can you tell me with any more specificity about what programs within that kind of broad area, or are there items within this that you feel like could merit some more investment by us?
So we have and continue to hone a list of high wage, high growth jobs. And that list does vary, and it also varies by the region of the state. We monitor those things in this particular instance with the Office of Skill Development and Department of Commerce. It's basically aligned to the target industries that the Department of Commerce has, so that those tiers in those lists, those targeted industries that we know we either have demand for now, or we want to attract those industries to our state, so we want to build a pool of workforce so that we can better attract those industries, are accentuated and funded at higher levels. So we do have some mechanisms in place to assure that not all credentials, not all of those things are weighted equally, that we have incentives in place for the secondary centers to offer the programs that are on our demand list and things that we want to use to enhance economic development.
Okay, well, if y'all need more, please let us know, because I think it's a big priority for many of us. Thank you.
Ross White, Director for the Division of Career and Technical Education. I do want to add one piece in there that I think would be remiss if we didn't share. So when we look at this from the secondary career center side that are on those campuses, those are K-12 students, but then we also have an accreditation that all of our K-12 schools have to offer career and technical education programs. And so there is an expectation on every single public school district campus that it's happening there as well. What we see a constant struggle there is when we start to have conversations around equipment. If we're training our students with appropriate workforce ready equipment, that is a huge cost, and it's an ever changing cost and an ever updating piece. We receive federal dollars, so Carl D. Perkins funding, that helps supplement that. But as a state, we only receive $14 million that's split between secondary and post-secondary. And when you do all the math down to what they're getting, it's a very small pot of money. We obviously are able to fund our instructors and pieces there, but the equipment seems to be a reoccurring piece at our schools, our K-12 schools, those home campuses. That is a constant struggle, and how we maintain equipment and stay relevant with what our business and industry is requesting from the area. So I think something, if you're looking and thinking future, what could those things be, that is always a large conversation that we have.
Representative Hawk, you're recognized again.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, Mr. White. And it did bring up another question that I have, and that is when our high school students are taking courses that are offered at post-secondary centers and yet not receiving the same accreditation or certifications, is there a way that we can, when a student graduates from high school and they have taken, so we can reduce the redundancy, I guess is my question, that they can go into the workforce being certified and so on?
So I'll start and let these gentlemen jump in. I think when you're talking about opportunities, and we always tend to talk about funding, but I think before we start really rolling up our sleeves and determining those dollar amounts, we got to look at our system and make sure it's coordinated and aligned. And I think the reality is, and it's not anybody's fault, or I'm not here to point fingers, but sometimes what the schools are doing in their school districts You have high quality programs where students are earning industry credentials. Maybe they're earning concurrent credit, and maybe they're getting those real life work skills that should be transferable to another institution. The reality is, depending on where that student goes, every institution has their own criteria of what they're going to accept. So sometimes we're now double paying for coursework that a student had already done, or we're frustrating the students or putting an additional financial burden on that student. So we've been working with our workforce cabinet. The governor's recognized that there's a lot of different people in this space. So we've already heard when we talk about Office of Skills Development, we talk about Secretary of Commerce and their initiatives. We have Carl Perkins federal grants. We have higher ed institution programs. We have K-12 full-time equivalency funding. Are we all working towards the same vision? And that's one of the things that Mike Rogers and all of us, we've all rolled up our sleeves to say, we're going to have a common definition. When you talk about what is that H3, a high skill, high wage, high demand pathway, we're all going to say the same thing, and all of our grants are going to say this is what we've identified as a state or by these regions that are the pathways that we need to be building forward. So as we work forward and start rolling out this vision for different pathways for students, there is opportunity that we're going to be probably coming to the legislature for say, we need some support to have a common course code directory that all the state colleges and universities are going to follow, because right now it's not coordinated, and it should be. And then there's some things that we know that we can incentivize school districts to offer these pathways that are meeting those high skill demands and making sure that whether that student's going into military or into the workforce, or maybe they want to continue their education, they can take what they've earned with them, and that's the system that we're going to be creating. And we're going through to make sure that all of our systems of funding are aligned with that, because we don't want to duplicate the equipment. We talk about that, but if we're all trying to fund it from different pots and buying parts that don't talk to each other, that's not efficient either. So this is something we've recognized that is much needed, and we're going to continue to work. I don't know, Dr. Ward, if you want to add to that.
I'll just give you one concrete example. Next week, we're having our career tech education coordinators, CTE coordinators, from higher ed and from K-12 in the same room saying, don't come at us unless you've talked to your higher ed partner. Don't come at us unless you've talked to your K-12 partner, because we're too solemn a state not to maximize all the efficiencies that we have. And this work has been done in some communities, but we're modeling this continuum of education at the state, and we're going to expect that of our communities, because we've got to do that for the benefit of our young people and our returners that are coming back to us. So appreciate Ross and his work in this vein, and all the opportunities that we have. We're no longer a higher ed K-12 separate silos. We're working together and being very intentional about that with high school diploma work all the way up with CTE and beyond. So hope that helps.
Representative Ladyman, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm way over here. The comment about the equipment at the schools, I understand that's a problem, but my question is, we reviewed some of the local officials, went to Valley View School a few weeks ago, and they had some awesome equipment there. And I'm not sure how they got it. I mean, they had equipment there in their medical training unit that the hospitals in Jonesboro don't even have. I don't know how they got that. But my question is, I worked in industry for many, many years, and some of the companies I worked for would work with the colleges and would provide equipment to the colleges to train those students to be able to come right into the workforce. So these private companies have funds available for that. My question is, can the high schools go for that money? Can they get those grants directly from the company or the entity to the high school? Is that allowed?
Yes, sir, absolutely. I mean, it depends on, I guess the will of the philanthropy or the company that's granting the money and how they see it best spent. The best models that we see are when communities bring themselves together and leverage all their assets. And so that when these companies donate things, whether the receiving end is the fiscal agent, is the institution of higher education or the K-12 entity, that they know that's being leveraged to the benefit of all. because we're very rural. We've got many, many school districts and many institutions of higher education. But when we want to encourage our communities to come together through these K-12, intentional K-12 higher ed partnerships and approach their industry partners and show that they're together so that when those tools, those training aids aren't being used by the high school, that they can be used by the college students, or that if they're concurrent credit, concurrent credit together. And then also, what about incumbent workers? Can we leverage those to train and upskill our incumbent workers at the same time? So I think the magic sauce is getting our communities together, letting them understand what their nuanced assets are, and then combining that with our braided funding so that we're not duplicating to help all. But absolutely, I mean, we'll whether they want to write the check to the elementary, secondary, higher ed, or one of our districts, we're happy to take it.
So there's no legal roadblocks to local schools doing that?
No, sir. There are some institutions are much more robust in how they approach that and have foundations and such that they, so they handle their business a little differently, but there's no rules against that. No, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, members, that concludes the questions. Entertain a motion for executive rec on the career and technical. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Stands approved. Mr. Anderson, we got any other business? No, sir. Folks, we are through. Appreciate the good work. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we're going to start with public safety and health. We are adjourned.